I interviewed and I started working pretty swiftly on the fixed income trading floor.
You decided at some point to go to business school. And why did you decide to go across the country to Stanford? A great business school, but a lot of people in the East Coast often stay in the East Coast. So what prompted you to go to Stanford?
I wanted to go and study further, and so I did. And I went to Stanford because that was the place where exciting new things were happening, and that was what I understood. It was in a golden age of entrepreneurship.
I see. All right, so you went to Stanford, and you met Steve Jobs then?
I did.
And how did you meet him?
It was my first week of school, first year, and he came and spoke to the business school during a speaker series called View from the Top, where there are several leaders that come throughout the year. And Steve spoke to the business school, and he was electrifying and compelling and funny and delightful. And afterwards, he asked me out to dinner, and we went to dinner, and we were together ever since.
So at the time, he was not at Apple, but he rejoined Apple.
He was at Next.
Next. So when he rejoined Apple, did you tell him it was a good idea to rejoin the company you'd been at before? Because usually when you go back to your previous place of employment, it doesn't always work out.
We had a very long talk about it because it was the first time that certainly in our married life, that we had a little bit of a reprieve. And he was a little torn about going back into a company, of course, that he was deeply devoted to and loved, but also he knew that they were not in good shape, and he knew deeply what it was going to take in order to turn things around, and that meant a lot of time away from family.
So the company became, after Steve went back, the most valuable company in the world. And Steve helped to invent this little product that's just the greatest consumer product, I guess, of all time, the iPhone, and most valuable probably. So did he come home one day and say, guess what, I got this iPhone, it's going to be the greatest thing of all time, or did he keep it, he kept it from you?
What do you think? Well, I'll tell you, he didn't keep it from me. He didn't ever predict that anything that Apple created was going to be the biggest thing of all time. In fact, he was quite accustomed to Apple being the David to the rest of the industry's Goliath. And they have had a beautiful ethos and culture of being rebels and thinking about things differently and differentially. So I did have the great fortune of seeing some of the products. He didn't really bring them home, but I could go visit them under the cloak of darkness in some of the design studios every now and then, yes. But we talked about business and the business of Apple most every night, and that was a great joy for me.
So when Steve became ill, eventually he decided to step back a bit shortly before he passed away. But did you talk very much about him in those days, about philanthropy? Because he had not been that actively involved in philanthropy compared to what you have done.
He thought about his work in the way that artists often think about their work. And so in his body of work, he felt that he was giving some service to humanity. Steve greatly esteemed what Andrew Carnegie did. He thought the creation of the libraries across the United States was the greatest act of philanthropy because it allowed people to use their own determination and resolve and motivation to further educate themselves. So having resources and information and knowledge available and accessible to people was for him the most important thing. He himself was an autodidact. He was immensely curious. I am also immensely curious. I think humans are immensely curious creatures. And so giving everyone the ability to improve their area of interest, to improve their situation in an accessible, equal way, was what he thought we should be doing.
Suppose President Obama had said, or President Biden said, I'd like to appoint you to a senior cabinet position. Any interest in doing anything like that in the government?
To stop doing what I'm doing for a different way, realm of service would require a great deal of deliberation.
It's time to look at financial services in a new way. Time to reimagine what's possible. And Irish companies are doing this every day, delivering innovation that improves customer experience and payments, strengthens security and compliance, and makes the digital workplace work. Enterprise Ireland connects you with world-leading innovation so you can reimagine what's possible for your business. Enterprise Ireland. Connect with Irish innovation.
The Omaha Steaks semi-annual sale is here. Right now, we're offering 50% off site-wide. The only number that hasn't changed is our 100% guarantee that you'll love every bite. And if you've never tried Omaha Steaks, save an extra $30 with promo code FIRSTTIME. Visit omahasteaks.com/TD today. Why wouldn't you want to save 50% on 100% satisfaction?
Philanthropy or when you do business through Emerson, you have metrics. In the business world, when you make an investment, you typically are looking for profitability or some kind of internal rate of return. In philanthropy, there's not an easily agreed upon metric that you to measure success. So how do you measure success in your philanthropic undertakings, and how do you measure success in your investment undertakings?
Oh, well, there are a lot of ways to measure success in philanthropy. I actually disagree with you. There are plenty of metrics. It depends on what the goal is. So, for example, if you have an education organization, you can measure student learning, you can measure student serves, you can see if there's economic and social mobility over the course of a decade. So there are a lot of quantifiable measurements, and we look at all of them. There's a lot of data to collect. There's also qualitative data where we can and do talk to people directly, and we are in communities and we ask people about how they're feeling about their lives and their opportunities and the possibilities. And so we collect both qualitative and quantitative metrics.
So you collect this data. Do you ever say, well, it's not really working and we should try something else, or do you typically continue to support the projects you initially start with?
Well, it's a good question. Sometimes the arc of change happens slower than one would like, and so there are indicators that could be positive indicators that don't quite reach the goal, and so we sometimes double down and sometimes we stick with it, and other times we often make exit grants, and in the same way, you exit investments, we exit investments and grants.
So when you're a well-known philanthropist, as you are, how do you avoid having people come up to you at every cocktail party or every event and say, I have a great idea for you, and you must have a process for filtering these things, but how do you avoid all that?
I don't avoid, well, I avoid it by not going out to cocktail parties, but otherwise, I don't avoid it because I know great ideas come from everywhere, and I read all my own email, even though there can be several hundred a day, and I'm always sending ideas on to different team members or responding. We say no an awful lot, but every now and then we find someone who's doing something remarkable, and I never want to correct for that. I will happily go through hours and hours of people pitching me on ideas for that one gem.
So you were close to President Obama. I think you knew him reasonably well. Suppose President Obama had said, or President Biden said, I'd like to appoint you to a senior cabinet position, come in the government, or somebody said to you, you should run for governor or senator. Any interest in doing anything like that in the government?
I do live a life of service now, And I feel like I am getting good at it, better and better each day, learning a ton. I love what I do. To stop doing what I'm doing for a different realm of service would require a great deal of deliberation. It's not my intention, but I would not necessarily shy away from another opportunity if I thought this was the highest and best use of my time. I think what I'm doing right now is the highest and best use of my time, and it took me a while to get here. So I'm very happily doing it.
This is Bling Bang.
Go air that runs factory. Go sensors and software. Go find leaks. Go fix them. Emerson Technology detects compressed air leaks to save manufacturers like Colgate over 20% in energy costs. Go brush your teeth. Go boldly. Emerson.
Dears Townsend.
Was this family deliberately targeted?
Did she ever tell you that someone was making threats against her?
You got me.
Tag, you're it.
Imagine a world with no drama. With 4imprint, you don't have to chase down the perfect promotional products. Exclusive apparel, bags, drinkware, and more. 4imprint will help you capture the moment and guarantee to deliver your order on time and on budget. Take the drama out of ordering promotional products at 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain. False or misleading search results can negatively impact your life. A bad online reputation can put you at significant risk of losing job opportunities or new customers. Reputation Defender helps clean up your search results, wiping away negative first impressions, allowing truthful, positive content to rise to the top. Don't you deserve to have more control over how you're represented online? Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 1-877-866-8555.
Did art conservation help you in any way to be a better investor? And should a lot of good investors learn how to be an art conservator as well, or not?
I think in conservation and art history and liberal arts, I think differently than a lot of people that have just done finance. And also, I think I mentioned one of the things is to do conservation, you have to really do a lot of work, pre-work, before you actually do a treatment. And so a lot of that pre-work is very similar to what I do in due diligence for investments. You know, lots of testing, lots of thinking about what could go wrong, lots of research. You know, when I was an art historian, that was in the old days before the internet, but you'd sit in the stacks and you'd pull one thing in a bibliography on this and you'd sort of, like a mosaic theory, put all these things together. I feel like I do that in my due diligence.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing. While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviews. I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? One of the most overused phrases I've found is Renaissance man, but it's not overused or inappropriate for one person I met with recently, Walter Massey. Walter Massey has been the leader of Morehouse College, the University of California, University of Chicago, the Art Institute, the National Science Foundation, Argonne Labs, and now he's leading the effort to get the Giant Magellan Telescope funded by the U.S. government and by private institutions. I sat down with him recently at the University of Chicago to talk about what he's most proud of having achieved in this incredible life he's had. Dr. Massey, you have been, I would say, a Renaissance man. You've been involved in education, the arts, business, science. Of all the things you've done in your incredible career, what is it that you're most proud of?
Well, actually, I'm proud of all of those things. I think the position that has given me more satisfaction is going back to Morehouse College, which was my alma mater, as president. I went back in 1995. And my wife Shirley and I, when we talk about the various things we have done, we agree that that was a lot of fun, but as I said, satisfying in a number of ways. To go back to your alma mater and to preside over the graduation of about 5,000 African-American men.
Let's talk about your background for a moment. You grew up in Mississippi when it was very segregated. What was it like growing up in Mississippi in the 1940s and 50s?
My mother was a school teacher. I'm an elementary school principal. I had an aunt who was a school teacher. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I didn't want to be a school teacher. I thought I might want to be an engineer. I have no idea. I think I just heard the word engineer. I knew I would probably go to college because even in Mississippi in those days, my family went off to college, mostly in Mississippi, at Mississippi institutions. I didn't know I would wind up at Morehouse, and that was serendipity, as a lot of my life has been. It's won this scholarship that allowed me to go from the 10th grade to Morehouse, and that really changed my life.
But you grew up in an all-segregated area. I assume you were not going to lunches and dinners with whites at that time.
No, the only lunches and dinners we came close to was working in the kitchen. My grandmother worked as a domestic, and even my mother, who worked as an elementary school teacher and principal in the summers, sometimes worked as a domestic. We were in a totally segregated. Segregated sounds too mild. It was apartheid. Like,
did you worry for your safety and life at times?
Not constantly. One had to be careful, and there were things you knew you were not to do from a very young age. White women were very dangerous. White men also, but in particular things, white girls and white women. There were places you didn't go. So there were modes of behavior which you expected or you learned to adapt to. But I didn't wake up every morning thinking I would be lynched. We lived in a community that was a fairly warm community. I had a big family, cousins lived all around me. And I would say in spite of the harsh segregation around us, within our little bubble, you might say, as much as you could keep it, I had a good childhood.
You got a scholarship to go to Morehouse when it was, you had only completed the 10th grade.
Yes.
So what happened to the 11th and 12th grade? Didn't need that? And you went to Morehouse, weren't you kind of young to get to college?
I was 16, and I was part of a program, so I wasn't the only one. It had been going on for 3 years, and I was in the 3rd year of this experiment. And there were about 15 of us in my group, and there had been some before. So the college had sort of adjusted to these young kids coming in who didn't have courses. So we had good counselors, we had very good teachers, and evidently we were smart. I didn't know it because we were able to not just survive, but I would say we were some of the most accomplished students in the college.
Okay, so you go to Morehouse and you decide you want to major in physics. So was that a very popular major at Morehouse at the time?
I was the only physics major for my entire 4 years in my class. There was one before me and one before him.
And what did you tell your parents you were going to be a physics major? What did they say?
My parents were very good. My mother, I think, would have wanted me to be the typical mother, to be a doctor, and I got a PhD, that was something. But they were comfortable with whatever I chose. I came to physics through mathematics. I was not a tinkerer. I was not a person who did experiments. And in fact, I was not that attracted to laboratory science, but I liked mathematics, and I was pretty good at it. And when I took my first physics course, I saw that here was a way mathematics could be used to try to understand the world around us.
So you majored in physics, you graduated from Morehouse, and then you decided to get a PhD in physics at Washington University in St. Louis. Why did you pick Washington University? A very good school, but how did you pick that school?
My physics teacher at Morehouse, his name was Hans Sabinus Hobart Christensen. He was a Danish white gentleman who PhD from Harvard, and he became my mentor and grew into a friend. But as I said, I was the only, in my advanced physics classes at Morehouse, I was the only one in the class. So it was like the Oxford tutorial system, just Chris and myself. And Chris recommended that I go to WashU. This is 1960 now, and because I worked at Morehouse 1 year. And it wasn't clear that there was every place was going to be welcoming or nurturing and supportive of a young black person who wanted to be a physicist. And Chris thought WashU had that environment, and it turned out that it did.
All of a sudden, you're handing out money on behalf of the federal government, the National Science Foundation.
Sure.
Did you find you were more popular than you had been before?
Oh, you won't believe it. Yeah. It's always best to be on the side of being asked for by than to ask for it.
New projects means new project managers. You need to hire.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. When you sponsor a job, you immediately get your short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job criteria. Visit Indeed.com/hire and get started today.
Girl, why don't you change those broken shades you haven't been able to open for the past 2 years? Let's tap the Thumbtack app and find a pro to install new ones. With Thumbtack, you can easily find top-rated professionals for every home project.
Thumbtack, the easy way to care for your home. We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. 1-800-Flowers. Share with love.
Usually headed to the course, or playing with my kids, or off to work. But with new Max Cushioning hands-free Skechers slip-ins, it's easy. I just step in and go without touching my shoes.
Tony, your lunch.
I'm a QB, not a receiver. Try new Max Cushioning hands-free Skechers slip-ins.
Asking the right question can greatly impact your future.
Are you qualified to do this?
What? Especially when it comes to your finances.
Are you a certified financial planner?
I'm a CFP professional.
CFP professionals are committed to acting in your best interest. That's why it's gotta be a CFP.
I have a surprise for you.
I have a surprise for you.
What? Let's say it at the same time.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
I booked
a rustic cabin in Vermont.
Beach.
Free cancellation on most days.
Well, that's good too.
That's nice.
Booking.com, booking.
Yeah.
Internet without trackers, without malware-ridden files. Zen. Be more cyber zen. Get NordVPN.
Introducing the Sleep Number Climate 360 Smart Bed, the only smart bed in the world that actively cools, warms, and effortlessly responds to both of you. Our smart sleepers get 28 minutes more restful sleep per night. Proven quality sleep only from Sleep Number.
When you got your PhD, what did you decide to do?
I came to Argonne here in Chicago as a postdoc, and Argonne was run by the University of Chicago, so I was also associated with the University of Chicago then. And my first job was working with the group at Argonne National Laboratory.
Okay, so you worked at Argonne. Eventually, you got a teaching position at the University of Illinois in Urbana.
I did.
And then you did that for while you were teaching physics?
I went to Urbana for 2 reasons. I loved Argonne, and I loved my research, but that's what I was doing. I lived right here in Hyde Park, about 4 blocks from here, Drexel Avenue. We could see it from where we were seated. 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and from where we are now, you could see the city burning, and I could see it from my apartment. And it really became clear to me that, I'd say I had this feeling that I was just not contributing to the civil rights movement to the degree that I felt that I ought to. I was going to Argonne, doing my research, coming home. I tutored kids around the community. But I wanted to be more engaged, and I thought if I went to a college campus where there were students, I would be more engaged in activities. I went to Urbana for that reason, and Urbana turned out to be the very best place in the world for the kind of physics I did.
You did that for a while, and then you got recruited to go to Brown University.
I did.
And you became the dean of students at Brown?
The dean of the college.
Dean of the college. And were there a lot of African-American professors then at Brown?
Actually, at that point, there were quite a few. And interestingly, you asked that because I was just reminiscing with some of my old friends about what we call a golden age at Brown. Brown, and then when I went there in 1969 and 70, we had Professor May in physics, engineering, chemistry, political science, history, 3 in English. The general counsel was black. The associate head of human resource. We had a wonderful black community. It didn't grow linearly. It didn't even last for a while. But yes, the period I was there in the early 70s was
right, so you're at
very
Brown,
vibrant period.
You're at Brown for a number of years, and then you got recruited to be the head of Argonne.
I did.
And so what does Argonne actually do?
Argonne is what's called a general science national laboratory. It's one of the laboratories that the Department of Energy owns, but they operated by contractors. The university operates Argonne. So for much of its history, it was involved in nuclear reactors. Now it does basic science, a lot of materials science, and low temperature science. That's why I was there in the 60s. It also has a very large facility called the Advanced Photon Source, which is like a giant high-energy X-ray machine that can, penetrate through materials and examine them. It also has some of the world's fastest computers. It has a big program in energy storage, advanced research on batteries. So it's a broad-based energy research laboratory now.
Okay, so you're running Argonne. Is that a place that was filled with a lot of black physicists and mathematicians, or it was fairly white?
I think it was fairly is not. Fairly is an understatement.
Mostly white.
Overwhelmingly white. Okay. Overwhelmingly white.
All right, so you're doing that for a number of years, and then you get a chance to be the head of the National Science Foundation.
I did.
All of a sudden, you're handing out money on behalf of the federal government, the National Science Foundation.
Sure.
Did you find you were more popular than you had been before?
You won't believe it. Yeah. It's always best to be on the side of being asked for by to ask for it.
Right, so you're doing that for a few years,
Yeah.
and then you get a chance to be the provost of the University of California system. Is that right?
That's correct.
So why did you take that position? It's a great job, and but you'd want to be a head of a major university?
I did by that time. Through my transition from doing physics to administering science at Argonne and then the NSF, I began to see that I really had a knack for, how should I say, running organizations. And that people liked working for me. And I liked working with people. And I saw that I could get things done over areas that I cared about. Science education, science for underrepresented groups, these kinds of things that I couldn't do as an individual scientist.
All right, so you took the position, you're the provost, the #2 position in all of the University of California system, maybe the leading public education system in the United States, higher education.
Yeah.
And so you have a chance to be the chancellor or the overall head of the University of California system if you'd stayed there for another year or two. And then all of a sudden, your alma mater comes calling, Morehouse, and they say, come back and be the president of this small college in Atlanta, not the head of the University of California system. Why didn't you say, look, I'm going to be the head of the University of California system. It's a better job than being the head of Morehouse. Why did you not do that?
I did say that. I said that for several months.
Okay.
My alumni and friends and trustees, I said, no, you're crazy. I've only been here a little while. My whole career has been in big science, big institutions. I mean, that's what I know. But I thought about it. It really was a family decision. One day, Shirley surprised me by flying in my 2 sons for dinner, and I came home from working there. They were. And we talked a lot about it and reached the decision that I could probably do more in areas that I cared about, some of which I just mentioned, at Morehouse, one. Secondly, that I really owed practically everything that I had achieved to my beginnings at Morehouse, and that I ought to do this. Our youngest son, the one who lives in Amsterdam now, Eric, said, you know, being head of the University of California would be great, Dad, but you could get a lot more accomplished being at Morehouse.
How many years were you the president of Morehouse?
I was there 12 years.
12 years, okay. So while you're at Morehouse, you get an opportunity to go on the board of the Bank of America.
No, I did that in California.
Okay.
Because then I went on the board of the old bank.
The old
before
bank.
we merged,
All right.
and we were located in San Francisco.
And then at one point, they said you should be the chairman of the board of Bank of America. Is that right?
That's right. Wasn't that simple, but that's right.
And did you want to be chairman of the board of Bank of America?
I had no time to think about it. It came about so quickly. It came as a result of a shareholders meeting in April of 2009, after the shareholders had put on the proxy, the agenda, a proposition to separate the chair from the CEO. As you know, in most corporations, that's a combined position. And the shareholder vote got a majority of the votes. Now, the board didn't have to accept that shareholder vote's recommendations in that regard, but the board did. And just after the board meeting, the then chairman, Ken Lewis, said the board executive committee was going to recommend it to the board that I be the chairman. This is on the way into the meeting. And I said, how long do I have to think about this? He said, about a minute.
All right. So then after you get that position, a couple of days later, the federal government calls you up and says, guess what? We got to talk to you. You got some problems. They told you that you had to do some serious things to fix the Bank of America. Is that right?
That's correct. I thought when I accepted the position, I thought, wow, it's prestigious, it's an honor. And I thought, well, I can do it. I've been on the board 15 years, so I wasn't a novice in the board room or with, by then, a financial institution. I'd been on the board of McDonald's, where we had a non-executive chair. At one point, Motorola had a non-executive chair, so did BP. So I had seen what they did. It's about a 2-day-a-week job, and preside over meetings, you help with the agenda, you keep in touch with the CEO. I said, well, I can do that. Until the Fed called and summoned me to Richmond, which is the office of the Federal Reserve branch that oversees Bank of America, which is located in Charlotte, and asked me to bring some other directors with me because I didn't want to take this message back to my colleagues by myself. And the message they gave me turned this into a full-time job.
So they said that you had some financial problems at Bank of America and you need to make some changes.
Yes.
And ultimately, you had to spend a lot of time fixing the Bank of America. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so then you led an effort to pick Brian Moynihan, who's still the CEO of Bank of America. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that worked out okay.
That's worked out fantastic. Brian, I think, has just done a wonderful, it's not just my opinion, he's been chosen CEO of the year, I think, a couple of times, not just in the financial industry, but throughout corporate America, and the bank has done very well.
Good luck.
TD Ameritrade, this is Anna.
Hi, Anna. This position is all over the place. Help.
Hey, Professor. Subscriptions are down, but that's only an estimated 15% of their valuation. Do you think the market is overreacting?
How do you know that?
The company profile tool in Thinkorswim.
Yes, I love you.
Please ignore that.
TD Ameritrade, award-winning customer service that has your back.
The Omaha Steaks semi-annual sale is here. Right now, we're offering 50% off site-wide. The only number that hasn't changed is our 100% guarantee that you'll love every bite. And if you've never tried Omaha Steaks, save an extra $30 with promo code FIRSTTIME. Visit omahasteaks.com/TD today. Why why wouldn't you want to save 50% on 100% satisfaction?
Let me ask you right now about something you're involved in right now, which is the Giant Magellan Telescope. You're leading the effort to get people to fund the Giant Magellan Telescope. Why do we need the Giant Magellan Telescope since we have the Webb telescope? It seems to be sending back pretty nice pictures. How much better is the Giant Magellan going to be?
4 times better.
4 times better.
4 times better resolution, which means the pictures will be sharper. But the science, the way it will work, the Webb, as you're seeing those pictures, very sharp. But they are identifying parts of galaxies and space almost back to the beginning of the universe that people haven't seen. They can't it cannot focus, however, more sharply as we would like to be able to identify objects. So the Webb will identify a portion of space. The GMT, Giant Magellan Telescope, can, in effect, zoom in on that space, have finer resolution, look at it more clearly. And in addition to that, we'll have a set of instruments which can collect that light, analyze it, and see, for example, does it contain signs of oxygen or water. So they'll be complementary.
All right, but how much does it cost before we get the Giant Magellan Telescope?
We're estimating now about a little over $2 billion.
$2 billion, and where is that money coming from?
About half is coming from private sources. The University of Chicago, being one of the 11 partners, will put up about half, and the federal government is now, we're negotiating with the National Science Foundation to come up with the other half.
You know, I've often thought the way you could raise money for the Giant Magellan Telescope is to take away the name Magellan, because he didn't put up any money for it, and let somebody very wealthy, Elon Musk or Bill Gates or somebody, say, we'll name it after them and put up $1 billion. You ever thought of that?
We think of that every day. I do. Yes. You have a millionaire that you like introduce me to?
I think you need a multi-billionaire, but there might be some out there. If you name it after them, it's a big naming opportunity. But
Actually, I'm laughing, but we do. We have naming opportunities all the way from a mirror, an instrument that will look for exoplanets, for $10 million. The mirrors can be named. We actually have one mirror named Mitchell, a generous donor through the University of Arizona, $20 million. The telescope dome itself is $100 million. And you can name the whole, we can negotiate the price for the whole telescope.
What are they going to name me after? Anything, the Walter Massey, anything? Or anything named after you?
I think they have some porta potties down there.
The life of people on Earth is going to be better if that is funded because of what? We're going to discover that there's life somewhere else in the universe, and how is that going to make our life better?
I don't think it's going to make your life better in the sense of delivering material comfort, material advantages. I think it's going to make human life more interesting and probably inspire people to think about their life differently. The artist Jeff Koons, who's a friend of mine, says that when he looks at those images from the James Webb telescope or the others that show you almost the beginning of the universe, you see these galaxies, it just makes you realize how special it is to be living in these times when you can discover these things, and how special it is to be a human being. I mean, how improbable it is that there's something like us that has been generated over all these years, and now we still exist.
Do you believe there is life in the universe somewhere else other than the Earth?
I do. Now, why do I say that? It's just probability. There was Enrico Fermi, who used to be here, actually, is purported to have said, where's everybody? You know, why haven't we heard from them? Because just given the number of stars with what now they're calling exoplanets, planets that look like they would be situated close enough in a position with a star to have life. They've already discovered 5,000 in our galaxy. And given the number of galaxies, billions in the universe, It just seems to be probably wholly unlikely, from a mathematical, statistical point of view, that you wouldn't have conditions like we have on there. But I don't have any other reason.
So as you look back on your life, incredible career, what would you say is the legacy that you would like to have people think about you? What would you most proud of having done? Is it the position at Morehouse or your scientific leadership? What would you say is your legacy to your children, grandchildren, and your fellow Americans?
Well, it wouldn't be any particular accomplishment. I would hope it would be that people would realize that you can accomplish a great deal in life no matter where you start. First, I do think luck is involved, a lot in luck. But if you have the right mentors, the right support, and if you yourself are willing to work hard at it and be curious enough and bold enough to take advantage of opportunities when they arise.
The first time you made a sale online with GoDaddy was also the first time you heard of a town named Dinosaur, Colorado.
I just got an order from Dinosaur, Colorado.
Start an easy-to-build, powerful website for free with a partner that always puts you first. Start for free at GoDaddy.com.
Some men and women freak out when they first notice signs of hair loss. Some say, no big deal, I don't look much different. Either way, hair loss does sneak up on you. And if you do nothing, chances are you'll soon see your hair getting thinner and thinner and thinner, all while a range of great options are available to you right now.
Before you lose any more hair, grab your phone and scan this QR code. Because Bosley, America's #1 hair restoration experts, can stop your hair loss and give you your real hair back permanently. We're giving away an absolutely free information kit and a free gift card to everyone who scans the code now.
But remember, the sooner you get started, the sooner your results of great-looking hair.
For a free information kit and gift card for $250 off, scan the code. Don't wait. Scan the code now. Get the permanent solution to hair loss, protected by the Bosley Guarantee.
Here's your parachute. Packed it myself.
Certain it's okay? Are you for imprint certain? Certainty matters, like the certainty of congratulating coworkers or saying thank you for being a customer with promotional products from 4imprint. Our expert team is dedicated to making your satisfaction a certainty.
Talk to myself.
Land the perfect products at 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain.
False or misleading search results can negatively impact your life. Reputation Defender helps clean up your search results, wiping away negative first impressions, allowing truthful, positive content to rise to the top. Visit reputationdefender.com or call today for your free consultation.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? About 40 years ago, a young college graduate, Mike Worth, joined Chevron, then and now one of the largest energy companies in the world. Today, Mike Wirth is the CEO of Chevron and dealing with the multiple issues that energy companies have to deal with today, including renewable energy. I sat down with Mike Wirth to talk about what it's like to run Chevron today in the current environment. So tell me about the state of the oil world right now. It seems as if the large oil companies or carbon energy companies are doing quite well. They have record profits, record revenues. And as a result of that, some people in the White House and other places have suggested a windfall profits tax. So is the industry in such great shape that it can afford a windfall profits tax?
Well, it's a cyclical industry, David. We see prices go up, we see prices go down. A windfall profits tax is not going to encourage more supply. It's not likely to reduce prices. In fact, it could do quite the opposite. President Carter tried a windfall profits tax in 1980. It was rescinded several years later, had collected a lot less revenue than was expected, and didn't result in more investment. It resulted in less investment and less production. So normally, if you want less of something, you tend to put more taxes on it. You want less smoking, you tax cigarettes. If we want more energy production, we want more supply to bring prices down, putting taxes on energy production is probably not a good idea.
In your current job, do you have to go to Washington to talk to regulators and legislators, and do you find that an uplifting experience to do that?
I do have to go to Washington. Uplifting is probably not the first word that comes to mind. I mean, they're detailed discussions, and we need to help regulators understand the potential consequences of some of the things they consider.
So would you say that Washington, by and large, doesn't really understand the economics of the energy industry, or they could learn a little bit more than they know now?
Well, I have empathy for people that sit in these roles. They have often broad responsibilities, and they may not have personal expertise and depth in some of the areas they're responsible for. So I view my job as to come in and try to provide objective input and help them understand the consequences of things they're considering to avoid unintended consequences and help achieve the goals that they're looking to achieve.
So when the President of the United States says energy companies are gouging American people, you get to be used to this when you're an energy executive, more or less, I assume. You don't like it, but you probably are accepting of it by now.
I disagree with that characterization. I don't think it's accurate. This is we're an industry of price takers, not price makers. These are global commodity markets, and prices go up, prices come down. We allocate billions of dollars of capital, our company does, every year. Just 2 years ago, we were losing billions of dollars as prices plummeted. And so through the cycle, it's an industry that generates kind of 10%-ish returns on capital employed, which is, I think, by the standards of many other industries, a pretty modest return.
So the war in Ukraine has driven oil prices up, I think it's fair to say. Do you think that that is a principal reason why the major energy companies are doing quite well, because the supply has been reduced because of the war in Ukraine? And do you think that when that war does end, eventually it will, I assume, it'll have an impact on reducing energy prices in carbon areas?
Well, the war and the associated actions have definitely had an impact on energy markets. But if you step back and look at the broader context, in 2020, we saw demand collapse with the pandemic when the world really locked down. In fact, companies in our industry had to shut in wells and stop producing because there was no place to store the oil that wasn't needed by the market. So investment levels came down. And then and nobody knew how long this would last. As the economy recovered post the pandemic, we got vaccines, demand returned. The industry's been struggling to keep up with the rate of growth once again. And so the market was already in a pretty tight situation before this war began. I do think when eventually it's resolved, and all conflicts eventually are resolved, I think that uncertainty and the risk to supply from one of the world's largest suppliers will be reduced, and I think we'll see markets reflect that.
A number of years ago, oil prices went as low as, I think, $20 a barrel. And when it was that low, major oil companies, like I think Chevron and others, said we can't afford to drill anymore in either, let's say, Alaska, the North Sea, other places, because we need to have oil at $70 a barrel to make drilling affordable and profitable. Has that come back now that oil prices are up? Are people now drilling in major projects around the world to kind of get oil that's going to take 4 or 5 or 10 years to build and drill, or is that not happening again?
We're seeing some of that happen again, certainly. What has really changed in the last decade, David, is what we see in the U.S. in the Permian Basin, but also in some other parts of this country and in other countries now, is the ability to produce oil and gas from rock that is very, very dense, very hard, and historically has not been very productive. But with directional drilling and the ability to fracture these formations now, we're seeing the ability to produce from areas that we couldn't before and at prices that are lower than some of these very complex, difficult projects. And so the need for the ultra-deep water, the Arctic, has been reduced as we see these other resources come in at a lower cost.
So how many employees does Chevron have?
About 36,000 in about 100 different countries.
And how much oil do you produce a day?
A little bit over 3 million barrels of oil equivalent per day. So mostly oil, some gas, and we convert the units on the gas to give you the energy equivalent. So about 3 million barrels a day.
So the United States produces 10 million barrels a day or something like that?
Closer to 12.
12, okay. So you're producing about 25% of the oil produced in the United States, more or less?
As a company, you could say that our U.S. production is about 1.2 million barrels a day, so we're less than 10% of U.S. production.
So right now, the United States is more or less energy sufficient compared to, let's say, the 1960s or 70s when we imported a lot of oil. I think we probably consume 10 to 12 million barrels a day.
Closer to 20.
We consume 20 million barrels a day, and we produce roughly, you're saying 12? So we're importing the equivalent of about 8 million barrels a day, which is better than it used to be. Where are we mostly importing that from? Is it from OPEC countries?
Canada. Our neighbors are the largest suppliers of oil. I mean, you remember all the controversy around the Keystone Pipeline. We're a big customer of Canada, who's a large resource country right next door.
How do you get that oil down here?
There are other pipelines that have been built in years gone by. And sometimes it flows by rail, and some of it comes by ship. You can bring it down through pipelines into ports along the West Coast, for instance, or into the Atlantic Basin and bring it by ship. So Canada's the largest supplier, and then other people in the region. And we still bring some oil to this country from the Middle East, but much less than we did back
now,
in the 70s.
Do you think there's much oil to be found in the lower 48 at this point, or even in, let's say, Alaska as well? Or mostly we know where all the oil is, and there's no more big Permian Basin kind of deposits anywhere?
People have said that over time, and then we've always been surprised. And so the U.S. has been explored more than any other place in the world. I think the industry has a good idea. But technology allows you sometimes to recover things that you haven't been able to before. That's the story of shale. The other one that continues to be a positive story is deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we'll go out and drill in a mile or more of water depth and then go down several more miles, 6, 7, 8 miles into the earth and find large fields. And the Gulf of Mexico is still relatively underexplored compared to the onshore. So I think there's still room for more discoveries.
So when you're starting there 40 years ago, did you say, I might be the CEO someday, or did you not think that was realistic?
No, I just hoped I would last to the next 2 weeks to get my next paycheck. That was never the game plan.
Your shipping manager left to find themselves, leaving you lost. You need to hire.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Indeed Instant Match instantly delivers quality candidates matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/hire.
Nothing feels better than having support, and the same goes for your footwear. So you've got to try Skechers Arch Fit. Skechers teamed up with podiatrists and designed footwear with podiatrist-certified arch support. Plus, they're machine washable. Get the arch support you're looking for with Skechers Arch Fit.
Chevron itself. What is the roots of Chevron? When was Chevron created? When did it start?
Founded in 1879 in Southern California. Began as a company called Pacific Coast Oil Company. Made the first commercial discovery in California in Pico Canyon in Southern California. became part of the Rockefeller Standard Oil Trust in the latter part of the 1800s, and then became Standard Oil of California when the Standard Oil Trust was broken up. Our headquarters and home has always been in California. We've been around for 143 years and really a part of the world's history. We made the first discovery in the Middle East, first discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia, among other milestones, and a long history of the world really reflected in our company.
So if I go to a gasoline station and want to get gasoline for my car, is there really a difference between the oil that Chevron might be produced that makes in the gasoline and one of your competitors? That gasoline is pretty much all the same?
There are specifications, minimum standards that have to be met for the products. And then what you find is that different companies either exceed those by more or less than others. And also, we have special additives. So we have a wholly owned additive company that manufactures an additive called Techron that has a very special chemistry to keep engine parts clean. And as engines get more sophisticated, as the tolerances get thinner, you're going to have carbon deposits that can affect performance in your cylinders, your injectors. Techron cleans that up better than others.
So if you're driving along and you need gas, will you stop at an Exxon station, or you got to keep going till you can see a Chevron station?
Keep going till I see a Chevron station.
Okay, let's talk about your own background. So how does one become the CEO of Chevron? Tell us, where were you born?
I was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico. My dad worked at the National Lab, and I grew up in Colorado, Golden, Colorado.
And you went to college where?
University of Colorado in Boulder, studied chemical engineering.
And you said, I want to work in the energy world?
At the time, chemical engineers could work in a number of different industries. I had a summer internship where I worked in a refinery in the Denver area. Found the work interesting. I found the people interesting, and had an offer to come to the West Coast and work for Standard of California. And it looked like a fun place to live and a place where I could do interesting work.
So basically, this is your only employer since you graduated from college, more or less?
For 40 years, the only employer.
So when you're starting there 40 years ago, did you say, I might be the CEO someday, or did you not think that was realistic?
No, I just hoped I would last to the next 2 weeks to get my next paycheck. That was never the game plan.
So what did you do? Did you move around the world over the course of your 40 years at Chevron? What did you do to kind of rise up? Were you an operations person or an exploration person, an administrative person?
Started out as a design engineer and worked on big projects. So an oil shale project, not the type that we develop today, but the other kind of oil shale you used to hear about. Built a plant that you can't find any trace of today. Worked on a facility in California to help bring in oil from offshore. Sold for pennies on the dollar eventually. A project in Africa that never happened because of a civil war. So I began by specializing in spectacularly unsuccessful projects. And at some point, I said, this doesn't look like a great career path. And so I moved into our marketing business, where I built gas stations and replaced underground tanks that were made of steel with ones that were made of fiberglass so they wouldn't leak. And you and I remember the old clickety-clackety wheels that would spin around on a gasoline pump. I used to put in the first electronic pumps back in the day. So these were smaller projects, but I could see the beginning, the end. I started to understand the commerce and how the business worked. And from there, a variety of roles, primarily operating roles across different businesses and around the world.
When did you become the CEO?
5 years ago in 2018.
Now, some people might say that God looks favorably upon the CEOs of energy companies because he lets them live a long time. And a number of your predecessors have lived quite a while, and some of them you live in your same area that you live in now. Do they call you with advice all the time?
Actually, I'm really fortunate, David. The three people who have done my job immediately preceding me, each for roughly a decade, the 1990s, the 2000s, and the 20-teens, live within a few miles of where I live. I see them regularly. We have lunch together, and
that's a plus. In other words, don't they tell you you're doing this wrong or doing that wrong? That doesn't come up.
Well, I get a lot of good advice, and you asked earlier about advice. These are people who have actually done my job, so I'm interested in their advice. They've lived through wars, the fall of the Soviet Union, terrorist attacks, financial crises. They've seen oil markets go through gyrations. They've dealt with geopolitical surprises. And so their advice is really valuable. During COVID, the first first thing I did was call each one of them and say, what lessons did you learn during the crises you faced? How do you think I should handle things as we have this pandemic unfolding? So we have a great relationship, and I see them regularly.
So you're still, by my standards, very young, and you've been the CEO for 5 years. So you could do it for quite a while and still be young, but do you have any ambition to go into the federal government as a cabinet officer or anything like that?
No.
And to do anything other than the energy industry, would you have any other career ambitions, or this is what you want to do?
You know, I love what I do. I love the company I work for and the people that I work with, and I don't have any ambition to do anything other than a good job.
So what do you do for relaxation?
Generally, anything that involves family. So I have 4 children. They're very active in outdoor activities. My wife is a good golfer, a good skier. So you'll find me on a golf course, skiing, scuba diving, fly fishing with family when I'm not at work.
And any of your children in the energy world?
No, not even close.
Okay. So are you a good golfer? There's some of you that if you have a low handicap, that's not good for being a CEO because it means you're spending too much time on the golf course, but I don't know whether that's fair or not, but are you a scratch handicap golfer?
Far from it. My wife is almost a scratch handicap golfer. I caddy for her in big tournaments. I actually sometimes will take a couple of vacation days and carry her golf bag, so that tells you who the better golfer is in my house.
It's time to look at financial services in a new way. Time to reimagine what's possible. And Irish companies are doing this every day, delivering innovation that improves customer experience and payments, strengthens security and compliance, and makes the digital workplace work. Enterprise Ireland connects you with world-leading innovation so you can reimagine what's possible for your business. Enterprise Ireland. Connect with Irish innovation.
The Omaha Steaks semi-annual sale is here. Right now, we're offering 50% off site-wide. The only number that hasn't changed is our 100% guarantee that you'll love every bite. And if you've never tried Omaha Steaks, save an extra $30 with promo code FIRSTTIME. Visit omahasteaks.com/TD today. Why wouldn't you want to save 50% on 100% satisfaction?
Attention all business owners. If you had W-2 employees during the COVID-19 pandemic, you may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee with the Employee Retention Tax Credit. The deadline to file your claims is approaching. Call now to see if your business qualifies. This approved payroll tax refund program from the U.S. Treasury Department is set up to reward business owners who kept employees on payroll during the pandemic. There is no limit on the amount of funding. Plus, you can get access to your cash in a matter of weeks. You want a trusted partner who understands the IRS guidelines. ERC experts are standing by to help your business claim your COVID refund. You may be entitled to up to $26,000 per employee. This quick and easy call can get your business the money it deserves. Don't miss the deadline to file your claims. Just call 800-296-0502. That's 800-296-0502.
Large carbon energy companies seem to me have a difficulty. Are they producing large amounts of carbon energy, which people like to consume, or are they supposed to transition to being renewable energy companies? And what are you doing, for example, to transition yourself a bit to be a renewable company?
Well, we're focused on leveraging our strengths to deliver lower carbon energy to a growing world. And what that means is in the near term, we can find ways, and we are finding ways to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of the energy the world uses today. So we're reducing the emissions associated with oil and gas that the world needs today, needs very, very desperately. And at the same time, we're building new inherently lower carbon energy businesses for tomorrow. So things like renewable fuels, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, geothermal are all technologies we're investing in, businesses we're growing that will play a bigger role tomorrow. And we're going to need many solutions. There is no one solution for this.
So in 2022, you bought a renewable energy company for roughly, I think, $3 billion. What was that about? Why did you want to do that?
Well, we had a renewable fuels business ourselves. This company, Renewable Energy Group, was one of the leading producers of biodiesel and soon to be renewable diesel in the United States. And they have great capabilities in the feedstock sourcing area. And so in any fuels business, raw materials are a very important part of the overall value chain. Traditional petroleum products, we have deep expertise in the raw materials sourcing for that. In these products, you're talking about raw materials that are like used cooking oil, something called distiller's corn oil, various bean oils from soybean and other agricultural products. These are markets that we don't have a lot of experience in. The quality, logistics, commercial dimensions of those markets are things that Renewable Energy Group is very good at. They have manufacturing facilities and some marketing. We have big market positions and brand positions, particularly in states like California, that encourage this. So the combination of the two makes a more powerful renewable energy business.
And today, in renewable area, which is obviously a growth area, do you think that if you were going to make more acquisitions without giving away inside information, you're likely to do more in the renewable area or in the carbon area?
You know, it's an active field of opportunity in both. For us, it's really driven by strategy, asset quality, value. I mean, the typical things you would look at when you do a deal. But as I said, over the last 2 years, we've done a big traditional energy deal. We've done a big renewable acquisition. I think in the years ahead, we'll probably do acquisitions in both of those spaces.
When President Nixon took office, shortly thereafter, there was an oil spill in Santa Barbara. And then under President Obama, there was an oil spill in the Gulf horizon. It was, I think, a British Petroleum. Right now, when you're drilling offshore, how safe is it to be able to avoid those kind of environmental damage? Is it much better than it used to be, or greater precautions than there used to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the industry has continually improved operating practices, equipment. Certainly the regulators in the U.S. have very high standards. We work very closely with the regulators on that. And the advent of newer technologies have continually made this safer. And so these are challenging, difficult operations in those kinds of pressures, water depths, and environments. But the industry has a strong track record today. And you know, there have been some notable incidents over time, but every company in this industry works really hard to prevent those.
So today, do you not worry about that kind of offshore drilling problems anymore because the safety is pretty good compared to what it used to be?
You know, every day I get up and I worry about safety and protecting the environment. Our people work in a demanding business, and it's a highly technical activity. We have very talented people. We've got very strict protocols and standards to keep people safe and keep the environment safe, but you can never take it for granted.
Why do you think it is that people love energy, but they don't love energy companies? In other words, people in the United States and around the world consume enormous amounts of oil and gas, and the people that provide it, like Chevron, don't seem to be so popular. Why is that?
You know, I don't know exactly why it is. You know, we're a big company. The numbers are big. Sometimes big isn't popular. Big energy, big government, big tech, maybe big private equities, an exception to that. But, you know, although we're a big company, we represent less than 2% of global oil production. And so in the scheme of things, it's a very competitive market, and we're a relatively small player. And I think, you know, what's important to remember is we need to have a balanced approach to energy. And that means we have to focus on affordability, because affordable energy is really essential for economic prosperity, reliable supply for national security, because energy security and national security are linked, and then protecting the environment. And I think as prices get high and it gets less affordable, you find people that are upset. And part of that is because we really haven't necessarily been able to find the right balance among those three.
And to improve the overall image of the energy industry, is there something you think that the CEOs or the companies can do to improve the image so that people, when they walk down the street, say, wow, Chevron has done a great job for America today? How is that possible, or just energy companies just don't have that kind of likely public image that's going to be so good?
Well, I think what would help, David, is to engage in this more balanced conversation about the benefits of energy. We hear a lot of people that have, views on what some of the consequences are of the use of energy. But as you say, they've made advancements in the quality of life, possible that we wouldn't have imagined, 2 centuries ago. And I think as we go forward, it's absolutely likely that we find ways to meet the needs of a growing world and reduce the carbon impact.
Let's suppose tomorrow you decided to retire, become a cabinet officer or something, or do something else. What would you say you have achieved as the CEO of Chevron that you're most proud of?
Well, I would hope that people would say he thought of others first. He strengthened the culture of our company. He kept people safe and made the company a better company when he left than it was when he founded it.
Can a handyman fix my leaky faucet?
Home questions don't have to keep you up at night. Get peace of mind with Thumbtack. We'll connect you with local pros for any home project. Thumbtack, the easy way to care for your home.
Go. Go lights. Go big city lights. Go spotlights. Go stadium lights. Emerson software helps clean energy become reliable electricity. Go good night. Go boldly. Emerson.
1-800-Flowers.com. Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing. Whether you want to say happy birthday. So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too. Thinking of you.
Wow.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Celebrate the people you love.
92% still active? Seems high. Seriously? It's just a bike. Wait, they make a treadmill with an intuitive speed knob?
Yeah, want to try?
92% stick with it. So can you. Start a 30-day home trial today. Terms apply.
Europe is at the forefront of building a new economy. On April 19th and 20th, Bloomberg New Economy will gather leaders of government and business in discussion around the most pressing issues facing the continent. Request an invitation to the live event in Ireland at bloombergneweconomy.com.
False or misleading search results can negatively impact your life. A bad online reputation can put you at significant risk of losing job opportunities or new customers. Reputation Defender helps clean up your search results, wiping away negative first impressions, allowing truthful, positive content to rise to the top. Don't you deserve to have more control over how you're represented online? Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 1-877-866-8555.
Sleep is crucially important, and I think we've moved from this attitude from it's an indulgence, a waste of time, almost an illness that needs a cure.
For something as universally important to human life as sleep, mysteries surrounding its necessity and utility have only just been recently uncovered.
Some of our biggest discoveries were in the 1970s or 1980s, and so it makes it a really exciting field because it seems as though we're uncovering new insights each and every day.
Some scientists are going further to find out how sleep and what happens there can be harnessed to further expand our understanding.
It's easy to memorize things. That makes you smart if you can spit back a lot of facts. But if you want to be wise, if you really want wisdom, you got to know when and how and why to use that information. And that's what your brain figures out while you're sleeping.
Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome. Prediabetes does. 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, but with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. And you can change the outcome. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test today. Go to doihaveprediabetes.org.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing. Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing. I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? About a decade ago, a young entrepreneur, Brian Armstrong, who was working at Airbnb, left that company to start a company to trade cryptocurrencies. The company he started, Coinbase, became one of the hottest IPOs on Wall Street. This year, because of the FTX meltdown, Coinbase has had some challenges. I sat down with Brian Armstrong to talk about the future of his company. So, for those who don't know much about cryptocurrencies, what exactly is Coinbase and what does it do?
So Coinbase is the primary financial account for many people participating in the crypto economy. So we help people buy and sell crypto. We also help them use it in a variety of ways. They can use it to send money, do commerce, borrow and lend, earn yield on their assets. So we think of ourselves as the primary financial account for people in that crypto economy.
Okay, so I know you're different than another company I'll mention, but is this what FTX more or less did as well, theoretically, for its clients, was to enable them to trade?
So FTX did one piece of what I just mentioned, which is the trading aspect. That's correct.
What do you think actually happened to FTX? You've been quoted as saying you think there was more than just occasional bad bookkeeping. You think there was more to it than that. Is that right?
That's right. And, you know, obviously I'm sitting here as an outsider, but it seems pretty clear to me that it's not just a run on the bank or, you know, poor management of funds. It appears that they took customer funds from their exchange and actually commingled them or moved them into their hedge fund and then ended up in a very underwater position. And that was, I believe, against their terms of service and against the law. And so from my point of view, it looks like a massive fraud. And we know that because they turned off withdrawals and the customer funds, which should have been held there one-to-one, were not able to be withdrawn. So that appears to be a fraud from my point of view.
So in your view, will the FTX bankruptcy hurt the industry and maybe produce an enormous amount of regulation that you may not want?
Well, I do think the FTX downfall is a bit of a black mark for the industry, and it's not representative of the whole industry, of course, though. And, you know, in traditional financial services, occasionally you see bad actors as well, like Bernie Madoff or what happened at Enron. Now, in terms of regulation, you know, I do think that it won't be a bad thing. We've actually, Coinbase has been calling for clear regulation and trying to work with policymakers for quite a while. We've made some progress on that across various G20 countries, but I think it will serve as a wake-up call and sort of a moment of catalyst where we'll get more clear regulation in the United States. And I think that'll actually be a good thing for both Coinbase and the whole industry.
So for your company, people who are clients of Coinbase, you reassure them, I assume, regularly, or they can find out for sure if their account is managed the way it's supposed to, it's not being used for some additional purpose. Is that right?
That's right. So, I mean, we actually are very different than what happened with FTX. So, for one thing, Coinbase is based right here in the United States. We didn't incorporate in an offshore jurisdiction like the Bahamas. We're also a public company, which means we need to meet all of the audit requirements of a public company. And so we show in our publicly audited financial statements that, you know, corporate cash is separate from customer funds, and you don't have to take our word for it. You know, a Big Four accounting firm has come in and proven that in these cases. So there's other differences as well. You know, we operate an exchange, but we've never created an exchange token like the way FTX did. We never operated our own market maker or hedge fund in the way that FTX did, because we believed that would be a conflict of interest. So the difference between the two firms, I think, cannot be overstated. And it's really a validation of the approach that we've taken at Coinbase over the last 10 years to sort of build this business in a trusted and compliant way, as opposed to what happened with FTX.
So for people who may not be that familiar with what your service is, let's suppose I wanted to buy a stock. I would call a stockbroker or somebody that's a market maker, say I want to buy a certain share. They would say, okay, you pay a commission. If somebody wants to trade a cryptocurrency, they in effect have an account with you, I assume, and they pay some kind of fee for the exchange. Is that right?
That's right. Trading fees is one of our major sources of revenue, and yeah, we've begun to diversify that as well. So we have a different category of revenue we call subscription and services, which has started to grow. So that's about 36% of our revenue in our last in Q3 of this year.
But today, people have accounts with you. They have it clear that you if they want to pull their account out, they can get the money, I guess, because you are not subject to a run on the bank, in effect?
That's correct. All customer funds are clearly segregated, and assets are held one-to-one for customers. So there's really no such thing as a run on the bank in Coinbase's world because, well, number one, we're not regulated as a bank, so we don't do fractional reserve lending. But also, 100% of customer funds are stored one-to-one. So if 100% of people want to come withdraw, they can do that, and we'll have their funds for them.
Okay, so you started the company in 2012, and you took it public, I think, in April of 2021. The IPO was an enormous success, and I think at the end of that day, your company was worth maybe $75 billion or more, and you were personally worth, I think, about $10 billion or more. The company's stock has come down about 80% in recent times, in part because of FTX and other things that have happened in the crypto world. So how does it feel to be worth $10 billion one day and not too long after a lot less?
Well, it's obviously been a difficult market for not just crypto, but also really all growth tech and biotech, I would say, too. So, we're in good company. Netflix and Spotify and all these companies have also come down similar amounts. We knew that going public would not be an easy path, especially in a new industry, being a leader. We wanted to be the first crypto company to go out there, and we kind of assumed that it would take, 3-4 years to go through a cycle, begin to educate, build trust in the public markets. And so that's the process we're going through now. And, my own personal net worth is not something that is particularly motivating to me in the sense of like driving personal consumption or something like that. I'm excited about building things with technology, and cryptocurrency is one of the most exciting areas out there right now. So, I'm gonna keep working on this company for the next, hopefully, decade or two, and I think it's an exciting road ahead.
So you told your parents you're going to start a cryptocurrency exchange. What did they say?
Well, I don't think they quite understood what it was at that moment. And my mom, asked me if I was going to have health insurance, which, I learned, even if you're creating a new company, you can pay for your own health insurance.
You can't buy great conversations or moments that matter, but you can invest in them. At T. Rowe Price, our strategic investing approach can help you build the future you imagine. T. Rowe Price, invest with confidence.
Let's go to talking about the time that you started the company and what you were doing about the time you did start it. So you started in 2012, as I mentioned. What were you doing before you started? Did you know a lot about cryptocurrencies? Where were you working?
Yeah, so before this, I was a software engineer and product manager at Airbnb, which, the travel home rental company. And, I'd studied computer science and economics in school. I had tried creating a couple other startups that were not very successful, one of them in the education space. And so while I was working at Airbnb, I kind of got to see they were trying to move money to 190 different countries all over the world, both collecting payments and then paying out the people renting their homes. And I was one of the engineers kind of working on that, seeing how difficult it was to move money globally, both, how opaque the fees were, how long the delays were, the chargebacks, all kinds of things like that. So, at that time, this was around December of 2010, I believe, I read the Bitcoin white paper, which came out, and it captured my attention in a really profound way. I remember reading it and thinking, this might be one of the most important things I've ever read. And it was saying something, it was describing something kind of like the internet, which was global and decentralized, a new protocol. But instead of for moving information around, this was for moving value around in different forms. And I basically just couldn't stop thinking about this paper for the next 6 months after that. I attended some meetups in San Francisco, some early Bitcoin meetups, and met some of the early people working on it. And eventually I just couldn't get this idea out of my head, and I decided I had to go try to build a prototype that would make this technology easier to use and trusted for the average person.
So what was the valuation of your company for the first round from the first investors?
Oh, well, I think Y Combinator probably got 7% of the company for the 150,000. So, not a very high valuation. And then I think the Series A was, I think we raised 5 million at 25 million post. So, obviously those investors did well.
So when the company went public, the return on the initial investments were staggering. I remember reading about it at the time. So I guess they were very happy with you at the time. I don't know whether they've sold their shares or they still hold them, but still it's very profitable, even at today's valuation, I assume.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, and they earned it, right? So that's the nature of these bets, is that if you can see something early on that most people are skeptical of, and you're contrarian but right, occasionally you get these massive wins that come out of it. And I think, when Coinbase went public, 1,000 people, employees, I believe, became millionaires. And, a lot of the early people wrote me incredible letters telling us how they, we had changed their life and all these things. So that was a really powerful moment.
And is being a publicly traded company CEO a pleasurable experience or not?
I actually, before we went public, I didn't really know much about what it would be like, and I went and did a bunch of research, but my research played out roughly how I expected, and I actually kind of enjoy being a public company CEO. It's a good forcing function for us to get feedback from the market, to get input from analysts and investors. I've found their thoughts to actually be quite helpful in terms of operating our business periodically. And then, of course, I spend the vast majority of my time really just working with the team on how do we build better products for our customers. I don't want to lose sight of that as the primary objective.
So let's talk about yourself for a moment. Earlier in your life, where were you born?
I was born in San Jose, California, in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
And were your parents technology people working at tech companies or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. So my mom was a programmer at home and things like that. My dad is a civil engineer and an environmental engineer. So yeah, we definitely had to focus on, STEM and math and science and education in my household growing up, I would say.
And when you were growing up, what did you want to be when you were in high school? Did you want to be an athlete or a private equity investor, something important like that, or what?
I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to be in high school. I remember even in high school, I was learning programming and I was learning computers. I was fascinated with that. I built some early websites. I even started a little business with a friend of mine in high school. We were kind of reselling computer hardware. So I don't think I knew that I wanted to definitely be a tech entrepreneur, but looking back in hindsight, that's certainly where my energy and enthusiasm was. And I was often staying up till 2 a.m., learning Linux and computers in my bedroom, and then I'd be sleep deprived and too tired to pay attention in history class the next day at school. But yeah, those were my early interests for sure.
So where did you go to college?
I went to Rice University in Houston, Texas.
And how long were you at Airbnb, and how did you get that job?
I was at Airbnb for about a year and a half or so, and I was employee number 40, I think, when I joined, and when I left, there was maybe 600 people. So it had gone through this incredible period of growth. I learned a lot from them, actually, just about how to run a great, product building process with engineers, how to raise money, how to operate in Silicon Valley, how to meet with people like at Y Combinator. So I learned quite a lot from that process.
When you left to start your own company, did Brian Chesky, one of the CEOs and founders there, tell you that you were making a mistake? You should stay at a stable company like Airbnb?
Well, my boss at that time was Nate Blacharczyk, who was one of the other co-founders at Airbnb and the CTO. And I remember he was very supportive, and obviously they tried to get me to stay a little bit, but generally there's a really incredible culture in Silicon Valley of employees who are joining these early startups. That sometimes they go on to do their own startups, and it's very much a positive sum environment. One of the things I'm most proud of is actually a lot of early Coinbase employees have gone on to found other companies in crypto, and that's been really positive and rewarding for us to see as well.
So you told your parents you're going to start a cryptocurrency exchange. What did they say?
Well, I don't think they quite understood what it was at that moment. And my mom, asked me if I was going to have health insurance, which, I learned, even if you're creating a new company, you can pay for your own health insurance. And there's little things like that made her sleep better at night. But I think ultimately they trusted me and they supported me, even if they didn't quite understand what it was. And they said, well, if this doesn't work out, hopefully he can go get another job and he'll be fine. But they sort of knew I was always going to try new things like this, and it wasn't worth trying to talk me out of it at a certain point.
investing in a lot of different capabilities and features that makes the in-store shopping experience that much easier, that much more compelling, whether it's price check, browsing inventory in this store, so that we can really make that experience as convenient and as simple as possible.
Convenient, simple, that's sort of what people have needed in the age of COVID. Is that here to stay, or do we go back when finally we all hope that the pandemic will be behind us in some way? Do our changing shopping habits go back again?
What's really interesting about retail in my 20-plus experience is that convenience never reverts itself. Now, the form of convenience has shifted, whereas, say, in 2000 to 2010, a lot of convenience was driven by more stores nearby. Now it's stores in addition to digital. There's nothing closer than the phone in your hand.
You've got to explain this one to me. What does it mean when the White House says we're watching markets carefully?
It means they have a Bloomberg.
I've seen the Bloomberg.
They have.
I've been in and seen it.
Lots of Bloombergs. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg.
I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean?
It means they have a Bloomberg.
On the David Rubenstein Show, Peer-to-Peer Conversations, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders. Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia. This is Count Under the Close. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto.
So what do you say to some of the old line investors, old line mean people my age or older, or maybe slightly younger than me, who say that cryptocurrency really serves no useful social purpose and ultimately all cryptocurrencies will go to zero? How do you respond to them?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a long history in technology of bubbles being created and then corrections. And, you know, there's hype cycles and doom cycles. And this has been true, obviously, with the internet in recent memory. But even if you go back to the railroads and, you know, the telephone and all these things, studying the history of this, you see that when a big technology innovation happens, early adopters come in, you see a bubble form. There's oftentimes irrational exuberance, and then a correction happens. But ultimately, there is a breakthrough there, and it takes sometimes, you know, a decade or more for these benefits to come to fruition. So that's exactly what's happening here with cryptocurrency. You know, 1 in 4 U.S. households have now used cryptocurrency. It's not a niche thing. It does tend to skew towards a younger audience, and so sometimes people who grew up and their whole career was in traditional financial services, it's hard for them to, you know, this is the innovator's dilemma, right? If people are familiar with the Clay Christensen book, it's hard for them to see this new thing coming along and seeing what the disruptive potential of it would be. And there's sometimes a little bit of blindness that happens with that. But nevertheless, the change is happening and more people are using crypto through every cycle that happens.
Well, before you started the company or while you were starting your company, Coinbase, did you buy some cryptocurrencies yourself just to show that you were a believer in it, or do you not want to have a conflict by owning some of these cryptocurrencies?
I mean, I really didn't have much money when I started Coinbase. You know, I had just left Airbnb. I had a little bit of money saved, but I wanted to exercise my options in Airbnb when I left, and that actually almost cleaned out my bank account. So I think I had maybe like $3,000 or $4,000 or something like that when I left over when I started Coinbase. So, you know, I certainly bought a little bit of Bitcoin early on, but we're talking about like $1,000 or something in that range. For the first, you know, 5 years, or actually, I mean, still to a large degree to this day, I mean, myself and other employees, early employees at Coinbase, we took our salary actually in Bitcoin. So you can imagine that had some interesting appreciation value. Right. We had to sell a lot of it to sort of pay rent and things like that. So it wasn't like we were able to hold all of it. But yeah, there was definitely some appreciation there, but I wish I'd had more money in the early days for sure.
Okay, so how do you respond to the idea that many people don't know what they're doing when they're buying cryptocurrencies? They're not that well informed, they're very young, and they're going to wind up losing their money because they're just not experienced. How do you respond to that concern?
Right. Well, I think that's a very valid concern across really any type of investment that people might make, not just in crypto, but in stocks and in everything. So my perception is that we actually do need more clear regulation that's crypto specific. I mean, crypto businesses like Coinbase were already regulated like a traditional financial service business. And, you know, we have a CFTC license and we're registered with FinCEN. We have a New York BIT license and various money transmission licenses. That's just in the US. But I think we need more crypto specific regulation in the US, both around stable coins, how centralized exchanges and custodians are, you know, the best practices they should have in place around audits and, you know, not commingling funds. Many of those things we're already doing. And then the big piece will be actually getting clarity around what's a commodity, what is a security, what's a stable coin. And we need sort of an updated version of the Howey test, which is something that the SEC uses that applies more to cryptocurrency. So there's a lot of legislation being put through Congress now, and Coinbase has been very active in DC, working with policymakers there. There's strong bipartisan support in the US to actually get clear crypto regulation. The FTX situation created a little bit of a delay in the legislation that I was hoping was going to be getting passed in the next quarter or so. But I think within the next year, we can hopefully get something there in the US and then go for the rest of the G20 as well.
So Sam Bankman-Fried was well known for giving money to politicians as campaign contributions and for lobbying members directly in Capitol Hill. Do you go to Capitol Hill very much to lobby directly for legislation of one type or another, or are you very involved in political contributions?
So I go to DC. Historically, I've gone to DC maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and I imagine that may even be more frequent now in the next year or two. We've made small donations to certain candidates that are pro-crypto, and but just standard stuff like, $5,800 or these kind of basic minimums. We've never made any kind of donations on the scale that Sam Bankman-Fried was doing through these large PACs and things like that. And, part of it is like, it's how the game is played. You need to sort of make relevant donations. That's what all companies do, public companies do around policy issues. But it does seem like the way that Sam was doing it, where he was so visible in DC, there was such a large amount of money. I think he was the second largest donor to the Democratic Party or something like that. It does seem like it was happening at a different scale. And, I think there's some really serious questions to be asked now about should some of that money be clawed back, because it appears that it was stolen from customers.
So when you come to Washington and you meet with members of Congress, do they really understand cryptocurrencies, or you have to educate them a fair bit?
When I first started going to DC, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I think many of them didn't understand crypto at all, and there was a lot of very basic conversations. I think today, probably 80% of Congress, maybe 70, 80%, understands the basics, and they understand the potential of this technology, that it has a lot of innovation potential, which we want to preserve, but it also has some risks. And unfortunately, it's attracted some bad actors to try to come into this industry to try to profit from it. And so they recognize the balance, the need for both clear regulation and preserving that innovation potential. There's still probably 20%, I would say, of Congress where they're either just very hostile to it or just ignorant of it. But it's not the majority view at this point. I've actually been very pleasantly surprised to see strong bipartisan support to get clear regulation, but help this industry grow, here in the United States, in the financial center of the world, as opposed to it being built, in these havens or offshore jurisdictions where we've seen that customers can get hurt, including U.S. citizens who may be attracted to those kinds of products.
Suppose I say I listened to your interview and I like to buy some cryptocurrencies. What would you recommend to somebody who doesn't know much about crypto, about what they do to get educated? And would you recommend to, let's suppose somebody's a young professional, he or she has a modest amount of money in the bank. Would you recommend that they put 100% in crypto, 5%? What do you recommend to people that they do if they want to experiment in investing in crypto?
Right. So we're not a registered investment advisor, so I have to be a little careful. I mean, we're not giving any investment advice to people. But what I do personally, and what I would tell people, I should say personally, is that if this is something new, don't invest in anything that you don't understand. And if you want to learn about it, you can put 1% of your net worth into it or something like that. That you would be okay if it all went to zero. But if it's not, then that's a way for you to dip your toe in the water and hopefully, own a little piece of this crypto economy that's happening more and more on the internet for the next 5 or 10 years. So I'm more in the mindset of, personally, I don't actively trade crypto or anything like that. I'm more of like a long-term buy and holder. And then I just try to help the company build good products and services. So I'm not like an active trader of crypto personally.
So for somebody that is a young person watching, he would say, I want to be Brian Armstrong. I want to be able to be a person who starts a company, very successful, a leader in his industry. What would you recommend as the skill set or the kind of things that somebody should do to become you?
Well, it's an odd question. I'm sure some people want to do that. Not everybody wants to do that. But for people who do, I think number one is study engineering, science, math, STEM. I think that's the language of our future, that you can have the most impact. And then I would say try building companies. I think that building technology companies is probably one of the best levers we have to improve the world, regardless of what problem we're talking about, whether that, that's climate change or fixing education or healthcare or anything like that. So, and starting companies is hard. I started a number of companies that didn't work, or they were barely successful in some small way. And it was, Coinbase is probably the 10th idea that I had that I tried, and that one ended up working really, really well. But there's others that I hope to create in the future, and maybe some will work, some won't. And so you have to be okay with resilience and failures and setbacks along the way.
I'm going to name a couple of your babies. I don't know if I'm asking you to choose amongst your children, but some of the most recognizable buildings by you, of course, the Millennium Bridge, London City Hall, the Reichstag, and the Great Court British Museum. What was your favorite project to do?
The Reichstag does stand out because, first of all, it's an energy manifesto. So it transformed something that was dependent on fossil fuels. It uses all the technology to produce something which is essentially carbon neutral. And as a public building, that's a statement. It's a symbol of a city. It's a symbol of a nation. It incorporates works of art. It's recycling an existing building, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the ultimate in sustainability. If you can give a new life to a building, it also creates public space at the roof level. It is the most visited parliament in the world, so it puts the public above the politicians who are answerable to them. And that, of course, was made possible by the politicians. So it's a demonstration of democracy in action.
Is crucially important, and I think we've moved from this attitude from it's an indulgence, a waste of time, almost an illness that needs a cure.
For something as universally important to human life as sleep, mysteries surrounding its necessity and utility have only just been recently uncovered.
Some of our biggest discoveries were in the 1970s or 1980s, and so it makes it a really exciting field because it seems as though we're uncovering new insights each and every day.
Some scientists are going further to find out how sleep and what happens there can be harnessed to further expand our understanding.
It's easy to memorize things. That makes you smart if you can spit back a lot of facts. But if you want to be wise, if you really want wisdom, you've got to know when and how and why to use that information. And that's what your brain figures out while you're sleeping.
How did Jeff Bezos realize you could sell anything on the internet?
The web was growing at something like 2,300% a year. Anything growing that fast is going to be big.
Why did Bill Gates create Control-Alt-Delete?
Kind of become the poster child of, hey, couldn't you have made this stuff a little simpler?
And what inspired Diane von Furstenberg to create the wrap dress?
The wrap dress created me.
On the David Rubenstein Show, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders, right here on Bloomberg. This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? The first African-American in the United States to become a billionaire was Bob Johnson. He did that by building Black Entertainment Television and subsequently selling it to Viacom. He used some of those proceeds to buy the Charlotte Bobcats, becoming the first African-American to be a major sporting team owner. He later sold that basketball team to Michael Jordan. Today, Bob Johnson is involved in a wide variety of business ventures across the United States. I sat down with him in Palm Beach to talk about his career and what he sees next for himself. So when you became the first African-American to be a billionaire, what was that like? People calling you up, telling you how great you are, or people calling up asking you for money all the time?
No, it was nothing like that, David. You know, I had run Black Entertainment Television at BET for over 20 years until I sold it to Viacom. So BET had sort of become a business success story. And as a result of that, people began to see me as sort of as an entrepreneur that was doing something pretty good at that time. And so by the time I got to where it was sold to Viacom, it was sort of expected that it would be worth something.
So when you sold it to Viacom, after that, you then bought the Charlotte Bobcats, an NBA team, and you became the first African-American to be an owner of a major sports team in our country. So what was that like? Was that thrilling to own an NBA team, or did you really just see it as a business venture?
Well, I first saw it as the idea of being first. There's been throughout Black business history, if you were the first Black to do something, you gain visibility, you gain notoriety, and you gain access to other people, particularly white business people who knew you by your reputation. So when there was a team coming up for sale in Charlotte, I said, you know, why not be first? I had the capital from the sale of BET to Viacom. So I said, well, why not? And I decided to make a bid and got a call from some of the business people in Charlotte that said, we'd like you to be the majority owner of the team. We'll be the minority owners and work with you. And so it just seemed to be the right place at the right time to do something I thought would be part of a strategic approach to being first.
So you owned the team for about 11 years, and then you sold it to a person named Michael Jordan.
Sold it to MJ, yeah.
And after that, you began an effort to build what I'll call a small business empire. You have investments in many different areas: private equity, financial services, fashion, lodging, hotels, real estate. And my own firm did something with you in private equity for a while. So is that what you're trying to do now, is build a mini empire in different areas? And what are your most important parts of that empire?
Well, what I did when I sold BET, I decided I wasn't going to just sit around and do nothing. And I decided that one way to sort of build value for yourself was to take your own knowledge, your own strategic vision, and deploy your capital and your brand to acquire assets that you could run with very talented people to help you do it, obviously, and align yourself with people who shared your vision and your culture about creating what I call wealth in the Black community, and demonstrating to the broader market that African-American talent with capital and strategic partners, like I did with John Malone when I started BET, could be successful and create value for yourself and create value for the investors.
So you've been very involved in dealing with Black entrepreneurship and Black business owners. Do you think today it's easier for a Black entrepreneur to start a company, or no more easy than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago?
David, I don't think it's necessarily easier. I think there's a mindset within the white business community, and to some extent in the country at large, is that this definition of equity and diversity ought to see money flowing, capital flowing into Black entrepreneurs for investment and operating startups of business. It's just not easy. It's just that there's a theory that it ought to happen. And I think if it were easy, or you would see more Bob Johnsons, more Michael Jordan, more Magic Johnsons, and Oprah Winfrey's and the like. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say it's easy. It is correct to say people think about it more, but do they do more? That's the problem.
So after the George Floyd murder, I thought that many people in the white business community said, okay, we've got to do much more in getting blacks on the boards, senior positions in corporate America. Has that really happened, or is it just talk about that?
Well, David, the sad secret of that is companies, white companies, have announced that they're going to put millions of dollars into diversity in terms of black investment business. But among the people I know, and I know a lot of people who would say, hey, I just got money from here, there, and other places, it's really not happening. I saw something in the media that said there has been something like $50 billion of pledges made, but less than 5% of that has ever been implemented. And to me, it's a real sad story. Because it's not happening. And I would know because no one has called me. Now, I've been pretty successful, as you know. The only thing I've done that with, David, and I am most proud of, is the partnership I've created with Vanguard, Fidelity, and Alight to create a 401k auto portability business called Portability Network, whose sole purpose is to keep black Americans, reduce cash out of 401k account by black Americans and low-wage workers and white that's Hispanic workers when they change jobs. Those three companies, put their commitment to diversity and opportunity and closing the wealth gap in a relationship with me, and that's what I like and respect. But I can tell you, the black community, entrepreneurs I know, are very disappointed with these, what I call press release announcements with no results.
So when you sold your NBA team, the Charlotte Bobcats, the price of NBA teams had not risen to the $1 billion range. Any regrets about selling it when you sold it?
Oh, definitely regrets. I tell Michael about that all the time.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
So let's talk about your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up born in Hickory, Mississippi. Hickory, Mississippi is a real small town, one stop sign kind of town.
What did your parents do?
Well, they were workers. My father all his life was a worker. In Mississippi, he was a lumberer, cutting down timber in Mississippi, and a little bit of farming where he lived. And my mother was a school teacher at the small school system in Mississippi. When they migrated up north to a small town, Freeport, about 100 miles northwest of Chicago, they became factory workers.
So you went to college where?
University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana.
And what did you study?
History. I was a history major throughout my whole
So what did you want to be?
I want to be a diplomat. I want to be an ambassador, a diplomat.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 68.
68. And then you went to Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton?
Princeton, right.
And that's to do further diplomatic knowledge kind of thing?
I got a degree, master's degree in international affairs, and the fascination was history and
Right.
global affairs.
So you get a degree from Princeton, a graduate degree from Princeton, and all of a sudden the U.S. government says we're ready for you to be a diplomat, or what happened?
Well, all of a sudden they ask you if you want to go into the Foreign Service, you have to take a test. And the test requires you to be literate in things that a kid from Hickory, Mississippi through Freeport, Illinois didn't really know about. So when they had a question, I'll never forget this, they asked me a question, one of the questions, what is Wedgwood? And they said, a dresser of this? I thought it was Wedgwood. It was a dresser. It was actually.
So you weren't familiar with Wedgwood. Right. So
It was
ultimately,
plates.
you came to Washington, though, and what did you do when you came to Washington?
Well, I came to D.C. with the Princeton imprimatur and the connections of people who were former Princeton Woodrow Wilson graduates, including a good friend of ours, Jim Johnson. And so I started making the rounds. People refer me to this person. I went to Senator Mondale's office. I went to Senator Kennedy's office and everything else. So this Princeton Mafia, so to speak. And finally, somebody, after I went to one of the offices, referred me to CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Got a job at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for a while, changed jobs from there and went and worked for the local Urban League in Washington, D.C., and from there became a lobbyist for the Cable Television Trade Association. And that's where I met all the guys in the cable industry, Ted Turner, but most importantly, John Malone.
But John Malone was your principal backer when you wanted to start Black Entertainment Television?
Absolutely. John, I'll never forget this. I was a lobbyist. We were trying to deregulate cable. Cable was heavily regulated to protect broadcast television on the theory that broadcast was free, cable was paying, and if we didn't protect free television, then everybody would have to pay, which was supposedly not good for people. Well, so my job was to go up on Capitol Hill and argue for the deregulation of cable so it could compete with over-the-air television. And so I met John Malone, and he said, Bob, if you ever have an idea, why don't you come out to Denver and talk to me? I said, yeah, John, I'll do it. And that's where my idea of starting Black Entertainment Television came from. And I took John up on his invitation and went out to Denver and made my pitch about getting me financing for BET. So John said to me, Bob, here's what I'll do. How much do you need to start this? I said, I need $500,000, $500,000. He said, Bob, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy 20% of your company for $180, and I'm going to loan you $320. That's your $500,000. And John said, under that deal, Bob, you will be 80% owner, and I'll be 20. Is that a deal? I said, John, that's a deal. What Malone didn't know, David, if he'd reversed the number and said, I'll be 80 and Bob, you'll be 20, I said, John, that's a deal. He didn't say that. So he kept putting money into BET while it was growing. Never put it in his equity, put it in his debt, and the debt got paid back. And one day I asked him, say, John, why did you put it in his debt when you could have put it in his equity and you own more BET? He said, Bob, I always knew you would work harder for yourself than you would for me. So John never sold a share of BET. So when I sold BET to Viacom for approximately almost $3.8 billion, John's 180 of equity, the 320 debt, of course, got paid back, netted him over $700 million in Viacom paper because we did a stock-for-stock deal.
Well, what was the theory behind BET, that African Americans should have a cable channel devoted to programs that would be appealing to them in particular? Was that what you were trying to do?
Yeah. Well, the theory was what cable was offering to the community, basically diversity. Because once RCA put a satellite in the sky that could orbit on a geosynchronous orbit that allowed them to send signals all around to every cable head in, cable became a competitor for television in the big markets. And in order to do that, they had to get some big cities who by that time in the 80s had black city council members, one or two, and maybe a black mayor. So while they were offering programming to everybody else, you know, whether it's MTV or CNN or ESPN, the black city council members were saying, you want this franchise, what are you offering for my community? And that's where BET became sort of a must-carry product to getting to cable, and the diversity part of it grow. But BET was really an extension of what John Johnson did with Ebony magazine, except his was print and ours was video.
So how many years did you operate BET before you sold to Viacom?
20 years.
You sold for roughly $3 billion, ultimately. So in hindsight, had you held on longer, would it be worth more today, or would it be worth less today because the cable world's changed so much?
It would be, in my opinion, less today, because once streaming came along, and the technology allowed people to have streaming wherever they could carry content, on your phone, on your laptop, in your home, wherever you go. It changed the paradigm of cable. and it allowed people to sort of pick and choose in an a la carte way what they wanted to watch. So if you only wanted to watch Netflix, you just get Netflix. Cable, you were paying for a bundle, even though you didn't watch all of the channels. So some people were paying for, if you weren't a sports fan, you're paying 30 cents, 30, 40 cents, whatever it is now, for ESPN. But if you never watched ESPN, you had to pay for it because it's part of a bundle.
So you then bought, as we mentioned earlier, the Charlotte Bobcats, a new team. You didn't know much about running a basketball team, I assume, so you brought in a guy named Michael Jordan. How do you tell Michael Jordan that he doesn't know much about basketball if the thing isn't working out perfectly? Can you say, Michael, I played in grade school and I know something about basketball? How do you tell Michael Jordan things aren't working perfectly if it doesn't work perfectly?
You don't.
Okay, so just let him run the team, and you basically owned it, and he more or less was the manager of it?
He was the general manager of it, and he decided on who he's going to hire as coach. He decided on what players he was going to draft, and he decided on how the team would be run. I was the payee, the payer in this case.
So when you sold your NBA team, the Charlotte Bobcats, the price of NBA teams had not risen to the $1 billion range. Any regrets about selling it when you sold it?
Oh, definitely regrets. I tell Michael about that all the time. But nobody could have predicted that Don Sterling would say what he said about black people, and that led to the NBA commissioner to say, we've got a huge racial problem if we're going to keep Don Sterling as an owner. And he basically forced Donald Sterling out, but being forced out and you walk away with a $2 billion, a lot of people would like to be forced out of their team for that price, so that was it. But Michael was always my first choice to sell the team. He and I have been friends, 10, 15 years before I even owned the team.
Really?
So, I wanted, if anybody I wanted to sell the team to, if I was forced to sell, it would be to Michael.
As we talk today, there's rumors that the Washington football team, now called the Commanders, might be sold, and NFL teams are pretty expensive, but any interest in getting back into sports? You're a native of Washington, or not native, but you've lived there for a long time.
That's probably a check too far for me, because these teams are so rich, and I mean, if you could get one, it's a little bit, I would call an NFL team about the closest thing to a license to print money that you can think of. But you gotta really pay up for it, because it's a great sport asset. It's one of the best, I would say, in the world, maybe better than some of the hockey teams, although pretty close.
You ever have any interest in serving in a senior position in the federal government?
Absolutely, unequivocally, no.
The aggravation factor isn't worth it?
It's the aggravation factor, but it's more importantly is I don't believe there's any integrity in it.
Big, expensive cities have a lot going for them. But if you live in one, you've probably noticed that these big, expensive cities keep getting more, well, expensive. You could always move away. You might have just started working remotely, so there's really nothing keeping you there. But then again, moving is a hassle. Well, what if someone paid you 10 grand to do it? What if they threw in free office space, a bicycle, or a gym membership? Programs in cities and states around the U.S. are doing exactly that, and they're getting a lot of interest.
We've had over 50,000 applications.
About 90,000 applications.
We've had over 1,800 applicants from all over North America.
So are these nascent programs actually beneficial to their communities and the workers joining them? Or are they little more than flashy advertising campaigns for places looking for an injection of fresh talent?
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
DOJ or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges next.
Was going to keep rate World Cup. This is a 3.
As the economic picture does. The BOK is getting ready to make.
When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg.
You've been involved in advising presidential candidates, and I presume presidents as well. Do you ever have any interest in serving in a senior position in the federal government or running for office?
Absolutely, unequivocally, no.
The aggravation factor isn't worth it?
It's the aggravation factor, but it's more importantly is...
Factor isn't worth it?
It's the aggravation factor, but it's more importantly is I don't believe there's any integrity in it.
So you do give money to politicians, though, because that's the system, but you...
It's part of the game. I think, to be honest, I think there's a need for a multi-party system in the U.S. to give more people a choice about where they can throw their voter support and their political support, but also to cause the country to sort of come together by having everybody have a role in deciding what is in the long-term best interest of the country. I've often believed that Black Americans as a people and as a voting bloc should adopt the same position that the original founders of the Congressional Black Caucus had in early 1970. Their philosophy was enunciated like this: Black Americans should have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And if we voted like that, we would be able to leverage that block, because it's a consistent block, in our long-term best interest, rather than being addicted to one party and ignored by the other party.
Do you have government officials, members of Congress, or people in the White House ever asking you for advice these days?
Well, I don't think they ask so much as I try to go to them to suggest to them what they should consider, particularly as it relates to what I call, I have a formula, a belief, what I call their business solutions to social problems. I'm not a big proponent of government handouts. I've never been in favor of government subsidies. I like the idea of government providing a pathway through regulatory freedom and balance to allow companies to create it. But there got to be some focus on economic benefits to, in my opinion, to the Black community. And for example, real quickly, I've got members of the Congressional Black Caucus to support something I call the Boost Act. The Boost Act, very simple, was this: it would give investors in Black businesses a tax preference if they would invest in these businesses. I called in legislation I was introduced by Congressman Mfume from Baltimore, would put $30 billion of Treasury money aside for preferences for myself or you, who would go to a company and say, I'm going to invest in your business, X number of dollars. When you exit that business or do a sale of that business, I will get a preference on my capital gains. And the whole idea, it was not a mandate, didn't require it. It was only voluntarily. To me, that's better than all of these pledges that are going around that are not being implemented. And that's the kind of way I go. The same way I did that with the auto portability.
So you're one of the best-known Black entrepreneurs and business leaders in the United States and one of the wealthiest. Do you face discrimination today in your daily lives or in your business career? Do you still think you're being discriminated against, or you think you're not in that situation? Others are, but you're so well-known you don't face that discrimination.
No, you face discrimination in terms of what I call bias discrimination, where people just they recognize you as Black first, Bob Johnson second, and wealthy Bob Johnson third. So when you get in that situation, you'll find cases like this. A clear example. I could go to a restaurant, and if I'm standing outside waiting to go in after I'm giving my car to be parked, someone will come up to me and ask me to get their car.
What do you say when that happens?
I say, can I take it and keep it? But no, I mean, the thing is, they see a Black man standing by a valet parking. Their intellectual bias assumes, one, you can't afford to be at that restaurant. Two, you're standing next to valet parking. You must be a parking lot attendant.
So today, as you look at the United States economy, are you worried that we're heading into a recession of some type and it will hurt not only black businesses, but all businesses?
I think the economy has to have a recession in front of it until we stop the huge amount of fiscal spending that comes out of the government. And I see nothing in the government that will change that trajectory on spending. And that's the part where I think we've got to face a recession, because as you keep dumping money and chasing fewer goods, it's probably the textbook description of you're headed towards a recession, and or worse than that, you're headed to something called a variation of that called stagflation, where you got spending going up and you got productivity going down, because it puts you in a problem. So yeah, I think so. Until something changes on that equation, yeah.
Did your parents live to see your success as a business leader?
They did in terms of BET. They didn't. I still owned it. I hadn't sold it, and hadn't done all the other things.
Did they tell you, you're terrific, we knew you were going to be successful, or they said, you're just the same as our other 9 children?
That one. My mother always used to say, somebody would say, "Oh, aren't you proud of your son, Bob?" She'd say, "I love all my children." That was her thing.
So as you look back on your career, what would you say is the best investment advice you've ever received?
Probably the best investment advice that I never received, but that I've lived my whole life around, is surround yourself with really good people. I thought about it just today, like I do many times, what makes a great investor? A great investment firm is comprised of people who are optimists and pessimists and realists. Because in the intersection of the debates that go across that wide range of personalities is where you find truth. It's part of the reason I'm so focused on freedom of expression. I see it in my own 4 walls, the robust and fulsome debates around how we commit our capital, what defines a good idea, what businesses to build or pursue. That's what drives the success at Citadel. And I've been very fortunate in life to have always had a group of friends who really push me, who make me better. And here I get to work with 3,500 colleagues who in their ways make me better each and every day. And collectively, as a team, we've had the opportunity to have an incredible impact on the financial landscape around the world.
Why does everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant, because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And when you look at what Accenture does, we're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about how long does it solve things, a lot of it starts with, the company being willing to set aggressive goals. And so what we are trying to do now is work with our clients to work differently and to work faster.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Hi, I'm Francine Lacroix. Join me on Leaders with Lacroix as we explore what drives the most influential people on the planet, with guests like U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry.
Climate has no affiliation with any party or ideology. Listen to the scientists. This is not a matter of ideology. It's not a matter of politics. That's the challenge.
Leaders with Lacroix on Bloomberg Television, TV Go, and Bloomberg.com.
Fly to the biggest biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question. Great question.
That's a question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interview, so I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? Currently, there are only 2 Fortune 500 companies run by African-American women. One of those women is Roz Brewer, who is leading Walgreens Boots Alliance, a well-known pharmacy chain. I sat down with Roz Brewer to talk about how she's trying to transform that company into one that also offers additional healthcare services to its customers. I have noticed that Walgreens and another company that's also in the drugstore area, I won't mention their name, but a competitor of yours, both of you seem to be interested in being in the healthcare business as opposed to the pharmaceutical drugstore business. Why is that? What's so much better about the healthcare business?
So first of all, Walgreens started in 1901, and when you think about drug dispensing, it's critical to all of us at some point in our lives. But one of the things that's very clear to us, ending the pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic, we realized our relationship with our customers and our patients was so much more critical. We delivered 70 million shots in arms during the time of the pandemic, but the relationship just went to the next level. Pharmacists have always been consultants with customers and patients, and you will see your pharmacist 10 times more than you see your primary care physician. But the idea of having a primary care physician interacting with the pharmacist is the way of the future. And we will need that ecosystem around us.
Okay, so in your case, Walgreens' case, you have begun a business. You've bought a lot of companies in this area that are primary physician companies. In other words,
that's right.
You buy the practices of primary physicians, and then, in effect, those doctors are working for Walgreens, and they are still serving their patients, but they're, in effect, employees of Walgreens. Is that right?
That's correct. So we just purchased Summit Health in the New Jersey, New York area. And now we're one of the largest primary care physician practices in the country.
So primary care physician practice, how many people in the United States of the 330 million people we have or so, how many of them actually have a primary physician?
From what we understand, less than 30% of Americans have a primary care physician.
Okay. And you think it's good to get an annual physical every year? I know you're not a doctor, but...
No, I'm not a doctor. But, I will tell you that, we're all going to be responsible for our health, both financially and managing our own care. And to get a physical every year is a good database for you, a baseline to build for yourself, because it's going to fall back on you. You need to know more about your personal health so that you can interact effectively with your primary care physician.
So I get an annual physical every year. I try to starve myself for the 2 weeks before the annual physical.
Yes, I have mine tomorrow, yes.
I have found it doesn't work, but okay. What do you think the biggest healthcare challenge is for Americans? Is it that we're overweight, we take too many drugs? What is the problem?
I think it's two-pronged. One is that, yes, obesity is a big problem, but I think it's negligence, but it's not intentional. I think people are confused about the cost and access of healthcare, and they think it's going to cost them a lot. And when people have variable employment, as we've seen across these last several years, is that, they're not quite sure what their insurance will cover and not cover, and what their out-of-pocket expense will be. So they avoid going to the doctor. And I think that is something we've got to bring clarity to, which is why, the digital side of healthcare is going to become very important, so that we can all look at our mobile devices and understand what's going on with their bodies.
COVID brought a lot of people into the drugstores to get their COVID shots, I guess. Has business picked up or gone down since COVID has more or less waned a bit in terms of the people getting shots?
What we're seeing at Walgreens is that we created, an expanded relationship. It did start with immunizations, but now people are very deliberate about their flu shots, and so they're still getting COVID shots. today, vaccines today, and they're getting flu shots in combination. Our retail business, if you look at our prior earnings, is up and performing well, especially as we transition into healthcare. The front of our stores are picking up.
So I read that post-COVID, it's difficult for companies like yours to get entry-level people to come in. They either don't want to come back into the workforce or they don't want the job that you can provide them. Is it hard for you to get people? I notice in the stores that I go to, the drugstores, they're always fresh people all the time, new people.
Yes, you know, there's a lot of turnover at the hourly level, I will admit. But as we have these conversations, it's becoming less about pay and more about their lifestyle and what they want to do and progression. And so what we're encouraging is that, you know, work at a Walgreens store and you can become a shift manager and escalate. And that's really what they want to think about as a career and development.
So if you were an entry-level person at one of these stores like Walgreens, what kind of compensation do you get? More above the minimum wage, but you pay like $15 an hour or something like that?
Exactly. And then it moves up based on, you know, shift manager and other responsibilities in the building.
So I've noticed that in a lot of the stores I go into, there used to be younger people, post-college or something, who were the younger people working, servicing the drugstore. Now I see a lot of people who are older, like post-retirement kind of people doing it. Is that a phenomenon you observe?
We see both. You know, on the younger end of the spectrum, it's those looking for development or a fill-in job while they're in college and doing something otherwise in their lives. And then the retirement community is a very, you know, rich environment for us to recruit from.
So I notice in a couple of drugstores, even in my area, which is not the poorest area in Washington, D.C., it's a nice upscale sort of area. When I want to get razor blades, you have to go to the front of the place and ask somebody to unlock it. Why are you locking up razor blades and other things that I might want to buy?
Yes. So, you know, this is a national problem. And, you know, this isn't, you know, random theft. This is organized crime. And, you know, state legislation has put guidelines on, you know, how much you know, the theft that you can steal before you're convicted. So it's a $1,000 limit. But we have been partnering with other retailers and sharing our camera feed. I know some of our partners here from Walmart are here, but we're all part of an organization that's coming together that says if you've, you know, we can put our camera feed together and tell that that person has been in our store and their store, and the numbers are higher than 1,000. So we've been able to impact these theft rings most recently.
What are the things that are unlocking key the most? What are people trying to steal the most, other than razor blades? I guess?
You know, I will tell you, it started at razor blades because that's such a high ticket item, but, you know, it's a lot of cosmetics. But really what happens is that they take advantage of what I would call the elbow move, and they just come in and swipe a counter. And so it's just a matter of categories now almost, and not just particular.
So what is the most profitable high margin thing that you all sell?
I'd have to say it's in our cosmetics area is one, and then in some of our durable medical goods, some of our take-home testing and things like that are very nice margin items.
What is the most frequent thing that you sell?
Most frequent thing is probably toiletries like toothpaste and personal care items of those types.
And why is it that whenever there is like a scare coming along or a pandemic or something, people rush to buy toilet paper? You notice that? People are they're stockpiling toilet paper.
It's called hoarding, and
okay.
It's one of those things you never want to be without.
Okay. What's the biggest surprise of being the CEO of Walgreens?
It's how complex healthcare is and how unfortunate it is to try and manage, you know, personal health in the health systems that we've set up in this country.
Detroit. You're family, how many siblings do you have?
I have 3 sisters and a brother.
Okay, and you're the youngest?
I'm the youngest of 5.
Okay, and are any of the others running drugstore chains?
No, but I do have a sister that's a pharmacist.
Wow, is she at Walgreens or?
No, she's not. No, we don't want to mix.
Okay, okay. So, all right, so what did your parents do?
So both my parents are deceased, but my parents worked in the auto industry. And so my dad eventually worked as a member of management, and my mom worked in hourly labor at
Okay, so you
General
can
Motors.
go to many good colleges. You went to Spelman, an excellent college in Atlanta. Why did you choose Spelman?
Well, I chose Spelman because, you know, I grew up in Michigan. I wanted to do something a little different, get out of the cold weather, but it was also a chance for me to be at an institution that I thought really reflected me, who I was, and what I wanted to do. And I think also, too, I mean, I got a scholarship, and so that was helpful. Being, at the time, there were 4 of us in college. And so I was actually pursuing, you know, support at that time, too.
And what did you major in? What did you want to be?
I majored in chemistry, and I thought, you know, I had always been pretty decent in the math and sciences, so I just did what I knew what to do. And I thought I'd either go into medicine or engineering, and actually I was recruited away by Kimberly-Clark to work in long-range research as a chemist. So I moved in that
You
direction.
thought you might go to medical school, but Kimberly-Clark stole you away. Right, okay,
Right.
so what did you do for 22 years at Kimberly-Clark?
So I started off in long-range research as a chemist. I was an organic chemist, and I had interned my summers at General Motors. And so I worked in chemistry there. I worked in analytical chemistry, moved into organic, worked in polymer science, and then I worked in on one of the businesses. I got a chance to join the M&A team probably about 6 years into my career. And at the time, it was when Kimberly-Clark was converting itself from a paper company to consumer products company. And we acquired several companies, and I got to run one of those companies, and I just stayed on the business side after that.
Okay, so you're doing that, you're there 22 years, you're happy presumably, and all of a sudden somebody calls you up and says, how about working for Walmart? What did you say?
No.
No.
On the first call, I said no. Probably the first, second, and third call, I said no. You know, if initially they were speaking to me about a job in human resources, and I really don't have that skill set. And so once an opportunity came about that had P&L to it, I joined the company, and I was group president at Kimberly-Clark, and I took a VP regional job to run the state of Georgia.
Okay, so you're at Walmart, and then somebody calls up and says, how would you like to run Sam's Club? Is that right?
Yes, well, a lot happened in the first 5 years where I ran Georgia, the Southeast, then the East Coast of Walmart stores, and then I was a candidate for the Sam's Club job.
All right, so you're minding your business, you're running Sam's Club eventually, right?
Right.
You did it for 5 years?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you're there for 5 years, you're the CEO, it's a pretty good job, I guess. Where you work, where were you living to do that?
I was in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Okay, you're in Bentonville, and all of a sudden, I guess another headhunter called you up and said, how would you like to go to Starbucks? Is that right?
No, actually, I made the decision to leave Walmart stores, and I was on the board of Starbucks. And I had taken the board seat as I was leaving Sam's Club, and so I had attending a board meeting, and Howard Schultz and Kevin Johnson approached me to become the chief operating officer.
But you said you don't really drink coffee, or you didn't say that?
You know, I was a tea drinker at the time, so that was interesting. And Seattle wasn't in my plans, but I fell in love with the brand and the company. I saw a great opportunity to help the company operate a little stronger.
Okay, so you moved from Bentonville to Seattle, and you
Yes.
became the chief operating officer of Starbucks, and Starbucks has become so successful because its coffee is better than other people's coffee, or what is the reason you think it's so successful?
I think it's 2 things. I think it is definitely quality coffee. It's customized, right, for all drinking palates. I also think that it's their coffee practices along with the baristas in the store. I think the baristas are top-notch and really interact great with the customer.
What's the most popular thing that people ask for when they go to Starbucks? Is it?
Oh gosh, you know, really just a simple pike, which is a black coffee, is still very popular at Starbucks.
Okay.
The cold beverages are really, trending. So.
Okay, so you're there, you're doing that for 4 years.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, I assume a headhunter calls you again?
Yeah, now that was a hit.
All right, a headhunter calls you up and says, how would you like to run Walgreens? And you say, I'm happy at Starbucks, or what?
I say, I think about it for a minute because I was enjoying Starbucks. I wanted to be there and didn't really think of myself, coming back into that level of retail. But it was the pandemic, and there were so many people dying at that point, and people who were adverse to being vaccinated. And I knew for sure, because I follow the science on things, my background is in chemistry, and the science just screamed, that if a vaccine became available, we could curtail this.
But Starbucks, you have the perfect name for that, brewer, right? So
Yes.
they ever mention that to you?
I got that all the time. Everything was what's brewing and all these, yes, hashtag everything.
So
yes.
when you told Howard Schultz you're leaving to go to another company, what did he say?
Actually, I had that conversation with Kevin first. It wasn't pleasant. I think the board was a little surprised, but we made it work.
So do you ever go to Starbucks now?
Every day.
Every day,
yes,
okay.
Yes.
You ever go to Sam's Club every day still?
Yes, not every day. I bulk up and...
Loyal.
Yes.
Okay, so now what's the biggest surprise of being the CEO of Walgreens?
I think the biggest surprise to me was how complex healthcare is and how unfortunate it is to try and manage, personal health in the health systems that we've set up in this country. And it's perplexing. I think that this marketplace is ripe for disruption, and I'm sort of drawn to transformation and disruption. So I became super excited about it once I began to peel back the understanding of the business.
Right, so you're the CEO of a healthcare company, in effect. It does,
Yes.
You have the physician's business, and you also have the pharmaceutical business. What do you do to stay healthy? Because you have to be a role model, right? You can't look like you're not healthy, right? So how do you have to exercise a lot, or what?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, like I said, my health exam is tomorrow morning. I'll be heading back to Chicago to get that done. So I take care of myself in that way. I like supplements, so, I take my vitamins daily. And then I will tell you that I work out 3 or 4 times a week as best I can. And so I make it a priority for sure.
I think about working out 3 or 4 times a week,
Yes.
but I actually don't do it.
The thing I haven't solved, though, is sleep. And I think that's our biggest opportunity. If I get sleep down, maybe I can lay off of the supplements a little bit.
You're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep a night.
No way.
No, you don't get 8 hours.
No way.
For the first, call it 18 years at Chipotle, this was you come into Chipotle along the line, you interact with the crew, and you customize your meal. We've got this separate make line, and it's digitized, and so the orders come in, and they're really kind of staged so that if you say at noon, I want to come in at 1 o'clock, we hold that order, and we will send it to the crew like maybe 10 to 1,
Right.
so it's ready right when you pull up your car.
How do you manage these kind of 2 different staffing needs, right?
Yes.
And making sure you have the right amount of people
Yes.
at the right time.
We spend a lot of time projecting sales. A lot of it is, it's part art, part science. We're trying to bring more science and more AI into it. Because if you get the right sales projection, then you know exactly what your staffing needs to be. So if you get the sales right, you can get the entire restaurant staffed perfectly. With just a couple people, our average restaurant now does about over $1 million per restaurant in digital sales.
Power, policy, politics. From the White House to the Hill, Bloomberg covers the leaders in legislation.
That was really a tectonic shift for this White House.
The theory of this bill, as I understand it, is there'll be a multiplier effect.
How did Democrats mobilize specifically younger voters?
Bringing you the political news you need to know.
The president has made it very clear that this is a significant focus.
For the intersection of Wall Street and Washington, nobody covers politics like Bloomberg. Everything you need to get set for the start of U.S. trading. Bloomberg The Open with Jonathan Farrell. drilling down on the numbers and preparing you as only Bloomberg can. Weekdays on Bloomberg.
So let me ask you what it feels like to be in your situation. Is it more disappointing or surprising that of all the CEOs in the Fortune 500, there are only 2 female African-American CEOs? Only 2.
Right.
You and the CEO of Teachers is the only other one, I think.
Yes, TIA.
And so are you surprised that at this late date in our history, we only have 2, or disappointed?
Well, I'm more disappointed than I am surprised. I'm not surprised because I know what it took for me to get here, and I know the trials and tribulations that I've been through. And, you know, I'm not quite sure a lot of people would want to withstand that. But I would tell you that the disappointing part is that this is just is totally ridiculous that there's only 2 of us. I think, you know, it's going to go beyond mentoring and sponsoring. It's pipeline, you know, filling the pipeline effectively, getting people of different races in operating roles, and having the confidence that, you know, that they can do it because they absolutely can.
So in your career, what has been a bigger problem, being a female or being African-American, or neither?
You know, I would have to say being African-American. I think that it is still, you know, an issue in our environment to accept people of different races, more so than it is gender. I think I've seen a lot of progress with women in corporate America, and I'd like to see more progress with people of color.
So as we talk today, you're in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I presume you're here to meet with government officials to some extent. Do you find that an uplifting experience when you do that?
You know, I find quite a few teachable moments for both of us. You know, I try and bring the real life experience of healthcare to legislation so that when the right decisions are in front of them, they make great decisions.
So what is the principal thing that let's say the drugstore industry would like to have the Congress do?
You know, first and foremost, you know, I would love to see our pharmacists to operate at the top of their license. And so for them to pass legislation that will allow pharmacists to both test and treat so that there's not a second step in, you know, just imagine a mom who has to take a child out of school and take them to pick up a prescription only to find out that the child is still sick and go back to the doctor. So if it's an ear infection, strep throat, we can do a test in the store to figure out and then pass on the prescription, and the recovery period is smoother and everyone goes back.
Legislation for that?
We absolutely do, yes.
Okay. And do you meet people from the administration as well, or?
I do. You know, most recently, there's members of Senate that are primary care physicians, and so I know who they are, so I meet with them regularly because they understand us best and help us carry the message, you know, throughout.
So your competitor, principal one, is CVS, I think, probably the largest competitor, some people would say. If CVS is right here and Walgreens is right there, and I could go to either one, why should I go to Walgreens over CVS? I could pick either one. Why are you better than CVS?
So glad you asked me that question. You know, I believe our customer experience model is stronger. I think that when you walk into a Walgreens store, you may not have this happen to you every time, but I think you get a nice greeting from our cashiers, and I think our pharmacists are second to none.
If you walk into a Walgreens today, would they know you?
It depends. If I worked out that morning, no, because they don't recognize me, but sometimes no, sometimes yes. And sometimes I can hear them say that I'm in the store. You know, I can hear them chattering.
So when they say,
Yes.
So you walk into a store though, and if you don't like something, you call the manager and say this isn't good, or do you just kind of tell them when you get back to the office?
So really what I do is I take a picture of it and I send it back to my team at the office and say, I wonder why this is happening, right? Because usually it's a decision we've made that is causing something to happen. 9 times out of 10, it's something we've done versus what the store has done.
So if you need a prescription, do you have to wait in line? Or
I do. I have to wait in line.
you wait in line?
I do.
You ever say, I'm the CEO of this company, I'm waiting in line?
No, absolutely not. No, but usually there's not too much of a line. So, but I know the best hours to show up too.
Obviously, you've had an incredible career. Did your parents live to see your success?
You know, it's interesting. If I could describe my dad would define my success as what I did in my, throughout my education. My dad was that father that showed up to everything. If I was getting the yellow ribbon and not the gold ribbon, he was still there rooting me on. So he really knew who I was as an individual. We talked about that a lot. He passed away 6 weeks before I finished Spelman, and we had conversations. He saw something in me, and he let me know that. So I think he is looking down. I think he kind of knew something good was going to happen. My mom definitely lived through a good part of this. And then my siblings are sharing in, the excitement in our family.
But your siblings, you were the youngest, your siblings say, well, when we were beating you up, we didn't really mean it?
Oh, yeah, the days my brother would, yeah, right. The days my brother would throw me across the room, yes. But we're very close now.
Right. And they have to wait in line for prescriptions. So sometimes headhunters have called you and said, would you be interested in this job or that? If a headhunter called you now for another corporate job, you're...
No, I would not. I really, truly think this is the culmination of everything I've done in my life is coming to bear right now. This is what I want to do. We're being very intentional about impacting medically underserved communities. That's important to me.
Fascinating entrepreneurs, because you also started really young. What did you learn? Did you always think that you'd be an entrepreneur?
Probably, yes. I think, which is a bit sad,
From
isn't it?
age, what, 5,
Well,
6?
maybe, I'm not sure. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so even though I probably can spell the word and still can't occasionally, it's sort of in my blood. But it's really fun starting a business. And fun growing a business. I feel it's a real privilege. And I started my business officially at 18, but I think I knew I wanted to do it very differently from about 15. But I'm sure it's, if you're surrounded by it, it feels very natural. So yes, it's fun.
And it started how? You started by you went to Florence. It was in Italy, and you started handbags.
Yeah, so I knew I was actually given a handbag by my mother when I was about 16, one of her old handbags, and I remember how it made me feel, and I think fashion is fascinating for the mood-changing, the confidence-boosting aspects, and the sort of tribal aspects of what fashion does. And so I went at 18 to Florence, knowing that was the home of leather goods, which is what interested me. I just wanted to learn, actually, and be surrounded by craftsmen who, making things is important, and that's going to be very interesting, I think, over the next sort of 10 years. I think the onshoring of craft and manufacturing is going to be fascinating, actually. I watched the offshoring. I literally saw it, and I think we're going to be seeing that coming back to local. We have to. When we're all looking at our objectives in terms of carbon, proximity is going to be key.
Back in 1997, I was interested in the following question, which is, there are a bunch of the dinosaurs called sauropod dinosaurs, which had really long, skinny necks. So Apatosaurus is an example. They also had really long, skinny tails. So I made a computer model that showed that, in fact, the tail of these sauropod dinosaurs could actually act like a whip, a bullwhip. Now, the way a bullwhip makes that cracking noise is because the tip of the whip actually goes about twice the speed of sound. Okay. I think the way they got a date was to impress the females by making loud booms.
Japan's critical role in the global economy is changing as the world recalibrates. After decades of stagnation, Japan's leaders are forging a more innovative and sustainable path forward to revitalize the nation. Corporate giants, policymakers, and pioneers tell us how they're doing just that. Every week on Japan Ahead, right here on Bloomberg Television.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia.
This is Count Under the Close.
Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? One of the most important decision makers on economic policy in our country is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. I recently sat down with the chairman, Jay Powell, to talk about interest rates, inflation, and the overall economy in 2023. So, Jay, thank you very much for being here. And why don't we start with an easy question? So, you made a speech last week commenting on the FOMC's decision to raise the Fed discount. It's clear that the jobs report would be as strong as it turned out to be subsequently. Had you known that the jobs report was going to be as strong, would you have done 25 basis points or something different?
David, thank you for that question, and thank you, thank you for inviting me here today. It's great to be here. So we don't get to play it that way, unfortunately. We have to, but I'll take it this way. So the message we were sending at the FOMC meeting last Wednesday was really that the disinflationary process, the process of getting inflation down, has begun, and it's begun in the goods sector, which is about a quarter of our economy. But it has a long way to go. These are the very early stages of disinflation. So the services sector, really, except for housing services, pardon me, is not really showing any disinflation yet. So our message really was this process is likely to take quite a bit of time. It's not going to be, we don't think, smooth. It's probably going to be bumpy. And so we think that we're going to need to do further rate increases, as we said, and we think that we'll need to hold policy at a restrictive level for a period of time.
If next month you had another 519,000 jobs created, net jobs, would that be good or bad from your point of view? Have we a lot of people working, but maybe producing more inflation?
We don't have the luxury of thinking about good or bad. It just is what it is. So, but I would say again, most analysts, most economists would say that to get inflation down from high levels that we've had, if you look at history, there is some softening in labor market conditions that goes along with that. And that is still, very possible and indeed likely here, some softening in labor market conditions. However, this cycle is different from other cycles because of where it came from, and it's just confounded all sorts of attempts to predict what it would do.
Okay, so the markets, after your speech last week, the markets assumed that therefore there would probably be another 25 basis point increase in your next FOMC meeting. Was that a bad assumption by the markets?
So what we said at the meeting was that we believe that we anticipate, is what we said, that ongoing rate increases will be appropriate. And the reason is we're trying to achieve a stance of policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time. And we don't think we've achieved that yet. So we said that, and now you see the labor market report, and I think, again, financial conditions are more well aligned with that than they were before.
So the assumption when you made your speech was that probably the Fed might even consider decreasing rates by the end of this year, and the markets no longer assume that. You think the markets are wrong?
Well, so let me say, these are, all of these numbers that we're throwing around here are conditional on incoming data and what happens. So we never say this is what we think will happen. We make a tentative forecast and then we let the data come in. For example, if the data were to continue to come in stronger than we expect, and we were to conclude that we needed to raise rates more than is priced into the markets or than we wrote down at our last group of forecasts in December, then we would certainly do that. We would certainly raise rates more.
So you've said your inflation rate target is 2%, but why 2% and not 3%? 3%, could be tolerable, really. I mean, for most of organized history, 3% is considered okay. Why do you want 2%?
So 2% is the global standard, and that is our objective, 2% as measured by the PCE index. And that's not something we're looking at changing. That isn't going to change.
That's not going to change?
Not going to change, no.
But, okay, so you need to get to 2%, and your goal to get there is by what period of time would you like to get there?
Well, we say that we're using our tools to get there over time. If you look at our forecasts, we expect 2023 to be a year of significant declines in inflation, and it's actually our job to make sure that that's the case. But I would tell you that, with inflation, headline PCE inflation is running about 5%. This is on a 12-month basis. Core is running at 4.4. My guess is it will take certainly into not just this year, but next year to get down close to 2%.
Okay, so 2% is firm. You're not going to get off that.
Yes.
Okay. So the theory of raising interest rates is that it will decrease economic activity and increase unemployment. But you've been increasing interest rates for a while, and unemployment is now at a record low. So what's wrong with the theory? Why is unemployment not going higher?
Well, the labor market is strong because the economy is strong. And as I mentioned, it's a good thing that we've been able to see the beginnings of disinflation without seeing the labor market weaken. It's just that there's a lot of demand for workers. In fact, if you look at the supply of workers versus demand for workers, demand for U.S. workers is now more than 5 million greater than the available supply. And the available supply consists of people who are either working or actively looking for a job. So this was not the case before the pandemic. The pandemic really had left a lasting mark so far on labor supply in the United States. The labor force participation rate came down, and there now is a shortage of workers, and it almost feels more structural than cyclical. So that's a significant issue.
Now, you've resisted, I think, saying what unemployment rate would be acceptable to you, I think. But is there an unemployment rate that you think would moderate inflation such that you would tolerate unemployment at 4%, 5%, 6%?
I guess I think about it this way. We have two goals that Congress has assigned us: maximum employment and price stability. Price stability, as we've agreed, is 2% inflation. Maximum employment means if you want a job, you can get one. So right now, the labor market is at least at maximum employment. Many would say that it is out of balance with more demand than there is supply. So what we're trying to do is get inflation down. We're not targeting a different unemployment rate. We're trying to use our tools to get inflation to come down over time.
So if I wanted to go get a mortgage on a house I was going to buy, for example, you would say I'm not going to be any better off waiting to next year than now, because rates aren't going to come down that much at the beginning of next year, so I might as well get the house now, mortgage.
So surprisingly enough, I get a lot of requests for advice on those kind of things.
And you don't give any?
And but I really can't.
Okay.
I really can't respond.
So, so on the whole, to summarize where you are, you're basically saying that the jobs data that came out was a little bit surprising, but in the end, you've taken into account, and you're pretty comfortable with the guidance you gave last time, and you're not prepared to give anything that's completely different guidance than you gave last week.
Well, I mean, this is a world in which we've had the labor market report, and I think it underscores the message that I was sending at the press conference and in the meeting, that we have a significant road ahead to get inflation down to 2%, and I think there's been an expectation that it'll go away quickly and painlessly, and I don't think that's at all guaranteed. That's not the base case. The base case is for me is that it will take some time, and we'll have to do more rate increases, and then we'll have to look around and see whether we've done enough.
of decentralized finance.
I'm going to take a look right here at regulation.
We are seeing digital currencies under some pressure.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto. The people.
I want to have some of my money outside of the sovereign.
The transactions.
This is a simple case of where did the money go?
And the technology.
If people wish to invest in it, they must be prepared to lose their money.
I am still very positive on real utility into this space.
Bloomberg Crypto.
In hindsight, would you say that when COVID hit the economy and we injected $5 trillion of fiscal policy into the economy, and the Fed did quantitative easing and other related things, kept interest rates very low, would you say in hindsight that was a mistake or was the right policy at the time?
So I think you have to go back to the decisions that were made in real time, and it was something nobody had ever seen. The global economy came to a virtual standstill. People were talking about depression. People were talking, and we didn't think, we had no idea when we would get vaccines that worked. So Congress took very strong measures, and we took very strong measures. And you see where the economy is. You've got a very, very strong labor market, but you have high inflation. As I mentioned, we're at the beginning of getting that down. If you look around the world, though, at other countries, they're also experiencing high inflation, including countries that didn't do as much as we did, either from a fiscal or monetary standpoint. So that tells you, though, that a big part of this inflation is actually related to the pandemic itself, the shutdown and then the reopening. That's a big part of it.
So there's some people that are worried about the federal debt limit and that we might not be able to extend it on time. We have $31.4 trillion of debt. Are you a little worried about the debt limit not getting extended?
So the debt limit is really something for the fiscal authorities to deal with. The Fed, our only role in this is that we're the fiscal agent of the Treasury Department. We're not a policymaker on that. And I will just say this really can only end one way, and that is with Congress raising the debt ceiling in a timely fashion so that the U.S. can pay all of its bills when and as due. That's what has to happen. And if that doesn't happen, no one should think that the Fed has the ability to shield the financial markets or the economy from the consequences of moving too slow.
So you don't have any program in place ready to go if, in fact, the debt limit isn't passed in time?
This is something that Congress has to deal with.
And the so-called trillion-dollar gold coin solution is not one you're in favor of, I guess.
As I said, this ends in only one way, and that way is Congress voting to raise the debt ceiling so that the U.S. can pay all of our bills.
And today, what about the total debt of the United States, which produces some inflation, 31.4, leaving aside the debt limit? Are you worried about the total indebtedness of the United States producing inflation, or you don't think that's a big problem?
Yeah, it's not the level of debt. I would say, the thing I'd say about the level of debt is really, it's not, first of all, it's not the Fed's job, but I would say that we're on an unsustainable fiscal path at the federal government level. That has been the case for some time, and it's something we will have to deal with. And it's better to deal with it sooner rather than later.
Now, many of your predecessors were economists. You were trained as a lawyer. They spoke in what I call Fed speak, which is to say incomprehensible kind of economic language, which was done intentionally, I think, sometimes they would say. So you tend to speak in English. Has that been a plus, you'd say, when you're dealing with members of Congress, they can understand what you're saying?
I like to think so. You know, I've made it a real priority to engage a lot with Congress. In our system of government, unlike the parliamentary system, our accountability is to the legislature. It's to Senate and the House, and particularly the two oversight committees, Senate Banking and House Financial Services. And I think it's very important that we respect that and explain what we're doing and listen to their concerns and share with them how we're thinking about things. And I think they appreciate that. But that is, you know, we have this precious independence. We can't be removed from office. We serve these long terms. The other side of that has to be accountability. And the way for us to get accountability is to be as transparent as possible and try to reach, you know, the people of the United States through their elected representatives. So this is a very high priority, and we're going to keep doing it.
So when you testify in front of Congress, how much time does it take to prepare for that? Is that a 1-hour preparation session, or is it a 1-day session, or a 1-week session?
These are supposed to be monetary policy hearings under the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, and they're actually on anything that's any political issue. So it's quite extensive. You have to prepare for everything that the Fed is involved in and many things that the Fed is not involved in. So it's a lot of preparation.
So when you get questions from some members, you have to bite your tongue and say, why are you asking a question like that, or you never have that problem?
That never happens.
Never happens, okay. Okay. In terms of consultation, do you consult regularly with the Treasury Secretary or the head of the National Economic Council or the President of the United States? How do you kind of relate to the administration?
For a long, long time, 60 or 70 years, I think there's been a weekly breakfast or lunch with the Treasury Secretary and the Fed chair. And that's what I've had with Treasury Secretaries that I've had as Fed chair. I've also had regular, or call it irregular lunches with the head of the NEC. We also have regularly scheduled lunches with the Council of Economic Advisors. And that's really that's the institutional structure of our contacts with the administration.
Does the President of the United States ever call you with any advice, or you don't realize did President Trump ever call you, or President Biden ever call you, or?
Well, I think it's a matter of public record that President Trump did used to call me from time to time.
Okay. What did he call you?
No, I haven't had that kind of, I haven't gotten any calls from President Biden.
When you're dealing with your colleagues on the Fed board, and you say, look, I'm the chairman of the Fed, I am the person who has to make the final decision, and this is what we should do?
We are blessed with a diversity of perspectives on the FOMC with 19 people, of course we are, but you have one thing that unites all of us, and that is a very strong commitment to getting inflation down.
The innovation agenda is going full speed on mitigation. That's where, there's 100 companies, Breakthrough Energy's funded.
By mitigation, you mean mostly energy. You mean everything to do with energy. You mean generation of energy. You mean batteries. You mean transport. You mean all of the new, and there's some renewables that are already traditional, but more that need to come out. So that's the package that you're talking about mitigation? Yeah. Or are you also talking about agriculture as mitigation?
Yeah, so every area of emissions, the world tends to focus on passenger cars and electricity. That's not a third of emissions. And so the focus on the easiest third, now 4% of new cars are electric, so that's the field that we're furthest along. About 4% of energy generation is wind and solar.
Multi-trillion-dollar industry. There's a lot of ground to cover.
Commodities got absolutely crushed.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Familiar with the FOMC. Who actually is on the FOMC?
The U.S. Central Bank consists of a board of governors here in Washington. There are 7 governors. Those governors are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and we serve terms that are not synced up with the election cycle. So we're independent. There are also 12 reserve banks around the country which have a degree of independence, and so each reserve bank is led by a president who works there full time. All 12 of them sit on the FOMC. So that's 19 people sit on the FOMC. So it's quite a large committee, of which 12 vote in any given year. The Reserve Bank presidents vote on a rotating basis, except New York, which votes every year.
So when you vote, do you vote at the beginning of an FOMC meeting and then just kind of have discussions afterwards, or do you wait to the very end and then you vote?
No, we vote at the end. I mean, the FOMC meeting process takes, more than a full week. I'm talking to all of the participants, all 18 other ones, and staff has sent around memos, and there's something called the Teal Book, which is the staff's assessment of the economy and international economy and monetary policy and all that. Then we have an extensive discussion on the morning of the first day about the economy. Everybody talks about that. On the second day, we talk about monetary policy, and then we vote on monetary policy at around noon on the second day.
So does the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board speak first and say, here's what I think, or does he wait until the end and say, well, thanks for what you think, but let me tell you what I think? What do you do, first or last?
Different chairs have done it different ways, and so I've tended to do what my immediate predecessor did, I think. Well, this is what I do. I speak last on the sort of the economic go-around. So everyone else talks about what they think about the economy and in their district, for example, if they're a Reserve Bank president. And I listen to all that, and then I give my comments at the end, and I kind of sum up what people have said. And then I speak first on monetary policy.
So do you consult regularly with some of your predecessors? I mean, obviously one is Secretary of the Treasury now, but Ben Bernanke, for example, or?
I do. I talk to former Chairman Bernanke. I talk to, Secretary Yellen. I still talk to Alan Greenspan now and again.
When you're dealing with your colleagues on the Fed board and you disagree with them, do you say, look, I'm the chairman of the Fed, I am the person who has to make the final decision, and this is what we should do, or you don't quite do it that way?
It's a process of reaching agreement, and I hear what people have to say, and I tell them what I think, and then I'm the one who has to bring a proposal in front of the full committee, not just the board, but in front of the full committee on monetary policy. And it works. We have to reach an agreement, and we get to a place. I think you can tell today we are blessed with a diversity of perspectives on the FOMC with 19 people. Of course we are, but you have one thing that unites all of us, and that is a very strong commitment to getting inflation down.
And when you want to talk to members of the board, of the Federal Reserve Board, do you go to their office or do they come to your office?
I like to do both. I mean, I really don't like to sit in my office all day and just have people come to see me. I like to go barge in on people, and I think it's much better to get up and walk around and see people.
But the Fed has been pretty good at avoiding leaks of its decisions. How do you do that? Because most people in Washington are not so good at that. How do you avoid leaks?
We do have, we've got very strict rules around confidentiality, particularly around the written materials that we have. We publish these things internally for the FOMC meeting, the memos and the Teal book and all that. But the other thing to remember, though, is, we're not trying to hide our decisions from the public. We actually, in modern monetary policy, we want the public to understand how we think, how we're thinking, and if markets really understand how you're thinking and a new piece of data comes in, the markets will go, well, they're going to do this, and it sort of happens organically. And that happened all last year. As we were, talking about raising rates, the market priced in rate increases long before we actually enacted them. So we want to be transparent. We're not looking to surprise markets with these decisions.
So you get data from all the various government agencies, but do you ever use anecdotal things, like you go to the supermarket and you see prices are high and you say this price is high, or how do you ever get anecdotal things, or people ever call you up or friends and say, by the way, you should do this or that?
I mostly get data, but I will say I do believe that anecdotal information is very useful. And one of the things the reserve banks are great at is all 12 of them have big operations where they talk to businesses and nonprofits, universities, every sector of the country and the economy, and they bring that back to the FOMC meetings, and they talk about what they're seeing.
So there has been discussion recently about the Fed, some Fed members, Fed board presidents, selling their securities and maybe not doing everything they were supposed to do in terms of disclosing it. What have you done to fix that process?
We've put a new system and a new set of rules in place, which I think are best in class for a public institution like the Fed. And the innovations were that if someone wants to sell something that they own or buy something, they have to clear that in advance with staff at the Board of Governors, and then you've got to wait 45 days for that to execute. Also, you can't own individual stocks, and you can only authorize these transactions or execute them during specific times. And we disclose, of course, all of these are disclosed. If your idea is to trade things, buy and sell them because you think this stock is cheap and that kind of thing, that's just not something that will work.
So what is the salary of the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board?
It's around $190,000, I believe.
Okay, so you live on the $190,000. If you need to sell something, what do? You have to clear it for 45 days? Or?
That's right. We've if we have family expenses that if we have them that exceed my salary, then we have to sell an asset.
You think that's a fair salary for the job, or?
I do, yes.
You do. Okay. So today, how do you coordinate with central banks, let's say in England or Japan or China? Do you have regular conversations with them about what they're doing?
We do, and I meet 6 times a year in Switzerland with the heads of many central banks, even the small and medium-sized ones in Basel at the Bank for International Settlements. In addition, among the major central banks, I have regular dialogues going with most of them. And so what we're talking, though, about is really what's happening in the economy and how are you thinking about policy and that kind of thing. It's very important that we keep those discussions going because particularly in a crisis, you're going to need to know each other and you're going to be able to trust each other.
Okay, so the biggest challenge you have now is being able to keep a straight face, not telling people what you're going to do in the future, and look at the data and then come up with the right solution, right? That's mostly it?
I think the biggest challenge we face at the Fed is completing the process of getting inflation down to 2%. And what I want to point out is that we're seeing disinflation in the goods sector. We expect to see it in the housing services sector, and these are the 3 parts of the core PCE inflation index that we look at. There's 56% of the economy, which is the rest of the services sector. It's the biggest part, obviously, and we're not seeing disinflation there yet, and that's going to take some time. And we need to be patient, and we think we're going to need to keep rates at a restrictive level for a period of time before that comes down.
MasterCard introduced PayPass, its first contactless payment system, in 2002, but the technology took some time to gain traction.
I would say we first invested in this many years ago. The adoption rate on this in the early part, even in markets like the UK, Canada, Australia, was fairly slow in the early part. The inflection point of when it really started to hit its stride was when it was used in the transit vertical. So what we figured is, let's get all the transit systems around the globe enabled for contactless technology. That will create muscle memory for the consumer who will like the experience in transit and will use it elsewhere.
How do you judge the revenue proposition for MasterCard with an innovation like that and the adoption and the pace of it?
Look, I mean, for us, we're agnostic as to whether somebody's using the chip technology or the contactless technology or, using the mag stripe, which was the old way of doing business. We earn revenues which are quite similar across both of those. The revenue potential and upside for us comes from the fact that now more spend is being done on card-based forms of payment than was being done in the past. So we're converting that cash over to electronic forms of payment, which is where the incremental revenue comes from.
If contactless payments is the current revolution sweeping the payments industry, what's the next one?
I think pay with your smile. So, biometrics.
Steve's ability on the course may not be etched into any record books, but following him around, it's clear that it's not for lack of trying.
Jeez.
We were constantly hustling behind him as he caught up with executives in the portfolio companies and reminisced with former and current players.
He's a day trader. He taught himself, self-made day trader. Yes. And so he's on the bus after a game in New England, and he's day trading on the bus, and Bill Belichick sees him and cuts him on the spot. In many ways, it's a convention, right, of the people that I don't see maybe once a year. And so it's kind of all come together. My firm, our charity, fundraising efforts, and then the friends that are around. My dad and my brother, it all happens right there as a confluence of all these parts of my life that have found its common center.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
Lisa, you've got to explain this one to me. What does it mean when the White House says we're watching markets carefully?
It means they have a Bloomberg.
I've seen the Bloomberg.
They have.
I've been in and seen it.
Lots of Bloombergs. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg. Lots of Bloomberg.
I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. I've seen the Bloomberg. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean?
It means they have a Bloomberg.
When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? I'm here with Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, who was the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Qatar, and we're in his home in Doha. Thank you very much for having us here.
Pleasure, David.
So for 20 years, you were the Foreign Minister of Qatar, and for another 6+ years, you were simultaneously the Prime Minister. So is it a pleasant situation where you don't have to worry about all those problems anymore? You're retired from those jobs, or did you love those jobs so much you wish you had them again?
Well, wish them again, no. First of all, for many reasons, history doesn't go back. And the second thing is that I think every part of your life has, if you know how to use it, you'll be excited in it. And I used my life from the beginning when I was junior in the governments until I become minister and municipality, Minister of Electricity, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Prime Minister. It took me a journey of 30 years of working in the government, 32 years actually. And for me, I think and I believe that's more than enough. I believe now I have a new chapter. I don't believe in retirement. But I believe that every age, every time of your life, there is something you can do, and you can do it and add value in your life and around you.
So now you're spending a lot of time with your investment activities, which are quite extensive around the world?
I am doing that, and I have my father and my own charity, which I'm involved in it, and I'm pleased with it. And I built it since my father died, and I think that's also, for me, is a very important part of my function or my life daily, especially with all the situation around us now in Syria and in Turkey, and you see this tragedy in other places. So it gives me pleasure to work in that and to do with my team. And yes, I'm doing business all over the world. And this is not only to do business, but as I told you, to be a fellow which you can add value for yourself and your family.
So let's talk about when you were Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, I should add, you were also the chairman of the QIA, the Qatar Investment Authority. So that would keep you pretty busy with all those jobs. As the head of Qatar Investment Authority, you made some very large investments for Qatar. One of them is in Harrods, with department store in London, the famous Shard building in London, investments in Volkswagen and Barclays and other things. So those investments seem to have worked out okay, but how did you manage being the foreign minister, the prime minister, and the head of QIA at the same time? Doesn't that take a lot of time?
I think it was tough for me because I was working with no weekend. And I was working sincerely more than what I should do. And if it's a candle, it will be burned by now completely. I even in my vacation, I was working and meeting people. You know me, and for long, we meet in my holiday, and we see each others, and we discuss business. It was tough, but it was a challenge, because at that time, we started QIA with no money, literally. And we started with nothing, aiming that the gas will give us flow of money. So we started with loans, actually. Most of these transactions being done by loans from the banks. And thanks God, the plan worked. We get a good revenue from the oil and gas, from the gas actually. Oil, we have very little oil. But that revenue all went to the investment authority.
As we talk today, it's been rumored in the press that QIA is looking to buy a team, a very famous team in the English Soccer League, Premier League, called Manchester United. So I don't know whether that will happen, but are you surprised at the interest in the Middle East about the English Premier Soccer League when there's so much interest? Many countries here seem to have investors who own teams there. Are you a big football fan yourself?
David, you know that I am not a football fan. And we talked about this a few times. And for me, I don't believe or I don't like this investment. Maybe it worked well, but you know, some of my son like this. And they always discuss with me why we don't invest in these things, why, and then they are pushing hard. For me, I thought this is not my specialties. Let me put it like this. I am an investor. If it will be one day as an investment, good investment, I will think about it. But if not, I will not look at it as something just for an advertisement. I'm not at that category.
The World Cup, when it was here, was an investment by your country, and I guess attracting people here, and millions of people came. Was that, in the end, do you think, a good investment, or are you not clear yet?
Let me put it this way. You know me, I'm always frank. If it was my choice, it will not be done at that time. When I was in the government and Prime Minister, and this idea came by His Highness the Emir father and his Crown Prince at that time, Sheikh Tamim, they know that I'm against that idea because I think there is a lot of money and effort will be spent. We can spend it in something else and it will be good for the people and the country. But if you ask me now, I will tell you there was a lot of outcome, positive outcome out of this. Look at the people which they visit Qatar, and I know most of them from the business communities and people which they are active in all over the world. They came, some of them first time, and they are coming again. They are bringing their family. So start working that. People saying, there is a place. We did not see it. It's a good place. And the outcome of that tournament was positive from different way. Good organized, well organized, despite all the noise, negative noise, last 10 years, which we hear it about it. It come the outcome when we said no alcohol, or the government decide no alcohol, we found people thinking, that's good, I can take my child, my girl can go alone, nobody can talk to her, nobody can, you know, there was no one incident happen. Organization was excellent. And I think this is the first and the last one where you can see the matches in the same day and you don't miss any matches because how close is it? So it was unique for the outcome was good for the country.
Listen to Bloomberg Radio wherever you are, online at BloombergRadio.com and around the globe via the Bloomberg Business app.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
How did Jeff Bezos realize you could sell anything on the internet?
The web was growing at something like 2,300% a year. Anything growing that fast is going to be big.
Why did Bill Gates create Control-Alt-Delete?
Kind of become the poster child of, hey, couldn't you have made this stuff a little simpler?
And what inspired Diane von Furstenberg to create the wrap dress?
The wrap dress created me.
On the David Rubenstein Show, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders, right here on Bloomberg. Let's talk about your country for a moment. The country is a very wealthy country, maybe the wealthiest country in the world per capita. Where does the wealth of the country come from?
Well, the wealth of the country, as you know, came from oil and gas, and mainly gas now. And I think this is, we cannot say that we contribute in it a lot. We contribute to take it out, maybe, in doing the right decision with the right partner. But I don't think that's an innovation. When you say how you get your wealth, if you are a country without any resources and you do well, like Switzerland, like Japan, these countries, they have no resources, and right now their GDP is high and they are doing very well. But for us, the challenge will be, okay, with all this wealth, what you are going to do with this wealth, how you can preserve it for the future. That's the challenge.
So when you were growing up, this was not an extremely wealthy city or country?
It was not wealthy city, definitely. It was a moderate. At that time, if you compare the 10 countries, rich countries, it's very, very strange. In the 50s or the 60s, one of them is Lebanon and Egypt. Not you, the American, not us, in that list.
Right.
And you see now how things change.
Well, when I first came here more than 30 years ago, there was only one building that was more than 4 or 5 stories. It was a hotel. Now,
That's true.
Doha looks like Manhattan, except it's more modern than Manhattan in many ways. So it's a stunning example of what you can do with the wealth if you deploy it appropriately. But all these buildings, who is occupying these buildings? Are these local people? Are these oil companies? Who's occupying all the buildings and the residences I see now?
Well, I think, it's same when you go to New York and now you find oversupply in office and in commercial. I think we have oversupply now in the market because this was a good business for everybody. So everybody was doing a building, either office or residential or retail, aiming that it will be rented by one of the companies or because there was, and still there is a lot of work. Right now, I think the people have to study what is surplus, and I think we have surplus in the offices and the retail, not maybe the the residential part. But it need carefully for any investors to make his own calculation. I think now we are in oversupply and we have surplus, which the effects start to be felt in the financial market.
Now, when you were foreign minister, you were jetting around the world a fair bit trying to solve a lot of problems, and you did solve a number of them. One that has not yet been resolved is the one you've worked on a lot, the Palestinian issue. You have a very close relationship with many of the Palestinian leaders. Do you see any way in your lifetime or my lifetime there'll be a resolution of that issue?
My dream is to see this solved and see that we live with the Israelis, the Palestinians live with the Israeli in a peaceful country, because they are, both of them, they are talented people. The Palestinian and the Jew, they are talented people. And one day I told them a joke. If they become united or work together, we should be scared from them, both of them, in my opinion. But when? That's need a leadership in both sides. Would like to take a step. It's not a leadership in America to push them. We need a leader, facilitator. It have to be United States, the facilitator for that, and the Arabs. Very important to be part of this. But it need 2 leaders, and they are not there at the moment, from the Palestinian side and from the Israeli side. We need another Rabin from the Israeli side. From the Palestinian side, Abu Mazen, now, he did what he did in Oslo and things. I don't want to evaluate the guy, he's a friend and I know him, but I think we need to see a new leadership which have commitment from the Palestinian side. I don't believe to solve the problem to do Abraham things, or I think this is in a kind of, I'm sorry to say this word, I think this is childish, because we are talking about normalization. We have no problem with the Israelis to normalize the situation. We talk with the Israelis daily. When I was in my office, they was having office here. Even when we shut the office, we was talking to them from the intelligence to the foreign ministers to the prime minister, and we can talk to them. But to do kind of build a new idea with no vision or no target, peace target, I mean, unreal, not just to talk. It's too early to do all this unless you have plan what to do. Because what I'm worried that within 10 years, if there is nothing happen, within maybe before that, we find ourselves in another intifada in the Palestinian side, and we will find the Arabs here, the street, saying what you are doing as a government.
So the Abraham Accords have not been signed by Qatar yet, or maybe they won't. You see that's not likely because you say it's not going to solve the problems that you think are important.
Well, maybe our government sign it one day, I don't know. I'm not part of the governments, but in my opinion, I think this is, tell me what we'll gain from this. The relationship, we have relationship. Everybody have relationship with the Israelis. All these countries which they did the Abraham, they have a relation with Israel. We don't need that. We need all of us to talk to the Israeli and tell them, look, we will do normalized business, we'll do embassies, we'll do like in the Arab plan, which King Abdullah said, even better than that. But let us sit and try to find the solution in the ground.
Now, many people in the West were surprised when there was a dispute between Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar a few years ago. It's now resolved. The essence of that dispute was never that clear to people, but you think that's now way behind the countries and it's not going to come back again?
It is way behind. Come back or not come back, I don't know, but I wish not. But I think everybody learn his part of that conflicts. Everybody learn where is the red line for each country. We know, they know our red line, we know their red line. And I think that's important to know. What is good now, that there is a good momentum, and I want this momentum to be reflected in the GCC. The GCC is dead since 12, 13, even when I was a foreign minister, the GCC was dead last 12, 13 years. We only use the GCC when there is crisis, military crisis, or we need to take a decision. You ask us to take a decision in the region and need to be in the name of the GCC. I want the GCC to be more affected in the life of the people, so they feel that they have benefit from this unity between the GCC. GCC is still, it's not there.
Are you worried about Iran? Many countries in the Arab world are worried about Iran. But Iran was somewhat favorable to you when you had your dispute with Saudi Arabia.
That's
so
true.
Is Iran not as big a concern for you as it is for Saudi Arabia?
Look, the first fear for me is not Iran. The first fear is us in the region, the way how we behave. I mean the leader. I'm not one of them. I think if we can control our happiness and our frustration, and when we are angry, to put it as a statement in a box and say, okay, we work, we have some difference with X country or that, but this different have to be discussed in a civilized way. And also to look, okay, if we have challenges and if we agree Iran is our first enemy, how we can deal with this matter? Are we going to deal with it through direct negotiation, through war, which it's nobody want war, because that's not in our benefit? The problem that this decision is not with us, because we are not in the position at the moment, because of what I said about the GCC, to take that leadership for our region and say, okay, we have problem with Iran, we sit with them and discuss in details, frankly, and reach a solution, because I believe we should live in the Gulf area in a harmony between Iran, Iraq, and the GCC countries. If we can do that, I think this is a big achievement, not only for the peace, for the trade, for the business, for the economy of that, all of this. They have over 100 million people. And Iraq have like 40 million people. We have like 50 million people. You know, you are talking about 200, 250 million people, rich country with oil. Imagine what they will do.
You and the emir both retired more or less the same time. Was it hard to give up that much power?
If somebody go and take me back, I don't want to do what I was doing. It's done. It's enough.
So Fabien, talk to me a little bit about the ocean. It covers 70% of the planet. It gives us food, it gives us jobs, it gives us, of course, oxygen. We're taking too many fish out, we're polluting it, we're making it warmer, and only 3% of it is protected. What frustrates you the most about this?
The basic frustration is our ignorance about how integral ocean is to not only our well-being, but to our existence. And for far too long, we've been using the ocean as an endless resource in a garbage can. Imagine our planet is a three-dimensional system. The ocean represents 99% of our world's living space, about 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, within which the vast majority of biodiversity lives and thrives. And that's what we're beholden to. That is what makes us possible as a species.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question. Great question.
That's a question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions.
So in the United States, you met with a number of presidents. Let's say, I guess, President Clinton.
George Bush, the father, until I know Biden, and I know even Trump, so I know all of them.
Did you ever have a hard time getting to see a U.S. president? Or I think when you were saying, I'm coming to Washington?
It depends. Sometimes if they are upset from us, it is hard. And sometimes if they are not upset from us, yes, I see them in the White House. And that's always, it happens when Al Jazeera is part of the problem. I have to say the best relation we have at that time with President Clinton, and he's a great guy. He's a great guy, how he can manage a situation.
When you were foreign minister and prime minister, I sometimes would come to talk to you about investment matters, and I would see other well-known investment people coming out of your office.
Before I am prime minister, and before I was for the investment, we was doing private, as a private client.
Right.
I was with you.
So you're right. So, but how did you juggle? You have a prime minister coming to see you, a foreign minister, an investment person. You have to change your brain for all of these different people coming in. It was you must have been working 7 days a week to do all that.
For me, it was tough, but I was used to work for long hours. So it was not, in the end, last 2 years, I felt inside deep me that I hate the job. I just want to leave. And this is maybe I say it lately in some programs, that I was suggesting to the Emir 2 years before we left together that I want to leave.
You and the Emir both retired more or less the same time.
Exactly.
Very often, it's hard to give up power voluntarily. People lose elections, but here they don't have elections, so you were voluntarily decided to step back from that position with the Emir. Was it hard to give up that much power, and you're happier now than you were then?
I am happier, definitely. And this is sincere, if somebody go and take me back, I don't want to do what I was doing. It's done. It's enough. I did what I did, right, wrong, I did it. At that time, I think I did more right things than wrong things. But also I did things in a space of time, very short time. I did a lot of things, achievement, I think, which I'm happy. For me, the world now so slow, right, in decision that I will not be part. I cannot see myself to go and do that.
All right, if somebody is watching and they say, I don't know much about Qatar, what would you say you would want people to know about your country?
I think our culture is something need to be seen. People, what they know about us, they know about oil and gas, these rich people, or they know about our camel. We are proud about our camel, and we are also happy about the gas. But they have to see this guy, which he owned the camel and owned the oil and gas. Is he capable? Is he did well with what he have? And that's the proof. You can see it in front of you.
You consider an incredible career in business, investments, diplomacy. What would you like to see your legacy be? Or is your legacy going to be your children?
First, I want to be seen as a human being, Qatari human being. I am proud about this country, about my country, more than what anybody think. And I'm so attached. Even I'm traveling a lot now, but I'm attached to this thing. So I'm proud that I'm Qatari. Second thing is, one of my legacy is my charity, which I'm building it very rapidly. That's something I need to leave it for my children. The third thing is, I need my children to work together, and that's very difficult. And I need to set an example for the families in Qatar and other regions, how the children, despite their different education, different ideas, how they can work together as one unity. That's a big challenge for me.
A cruise ship is much more than a flotilla of financials and numbers. Naftali Holt showed me around the Celebrity Beyond, Royal Caribbean's newest ship, rolling out not the red carpet, instead the magic carpet, an example of investment that's yielding returns in several different ways.
Originally, actually, we designed it because we wanted to have a really nice platform for tendering, because sometimes we can't home port
So
destinations.
functional.
Exactly, value fractional. And then we looked at it and